Chapter 244. Sullen's vision blurred, and in the next second, he appeared in a hall. Sulan looked at Hathaway in confusion. What's going on? Didn't they teleport to the lab? Why did they go straight back to the castle? The coordinates were wrong. Just a small error. Hathaway shrunk her neck and said awkwardly. Sulan glared at her and didn't pursue the matter. However, he had already decided that he would confirm the coordinates himself next time. The teleportation spell was very dangerous. It was convenient to teleport successfully, but the consequences would be equally serious if there was a mistake. For example, if they were teleported directly into mud or rocks, they would suffocate if they weren't strong enough, or they would be teleported to dangerous areas. In short, it was very dangerous if the coordinates were wrong. Sensing the spatial ripples in the hall, Chris quickly appeared here. Master, you're back. Chris was wearing a beautiful maid outfit, which accentuated her curvaceous figure. She had a different kind of charm. Although the maid outfit was a bit loose, it was obviously different on Chris. As Sullen's spokesperson, Chris was the highest officer when Sulan wasn't around. Sulan smiled and nodded, then reached out and patted her head. How's the development in the city? Did anything happen? Everything in the city is good. It's been developing according to your requirements. Mirror Lake City reported yesterday that they were a bit short on manpower, so I gave them the refugees we took in this month. Chris shook her head. Sulan smiled. Looks like Mirror Lake City is developing very well. North Town City is developing well now. You can give them more support. Chris nodded to show that she understood. By the way, I'll take you to a good place in a few days. Sulan winked and smiled. Chris was a bit confused, but she still nodded obediently. By the way, Master, there's a man who says he's a messenger from the Kingdom of Florence who wants to see you. I don't have time to see him now. Let him wait. Sulan waved his hand and prepared to go upstairs. After a few days of high-intensity work, although he didn't feel too tired physically, he was mentally exhausted and needed to rest. After a brief explanation, Sulan yawned and went back to sleep. After resting for a day, Sulan got up in high spirits. Sulan changed his clothes and went to take a look at the city. After a year of development, Northern City now had a population of 25,000. If you counted the goblins, kobolds, gnolls, orcs, and other slaves, the population of Northern City had exceeded 40,000. It was considered a medium-sized city in the northern provinces. After all, there were only 3 large cities like Cult in the entire northern provinces. The streets of the city were straight, and all the roads were paved with a layer of stones or slabs. It would not be muddy when it rained, and there would not be dust when it was sunny. The streets were very clean. Even the horses that passed by had a bag hanging behind them, which was specially used to collect horse dung. Northern Town had very high standards for hygiene. If a horse urinated or defecated in the town, it would be charged to the owner. Not only would the owner be fined, but the owner would also have to do volunteer work. Later on, when the fertilizer factory in Northern Town began to produce, the horse dung would be collected. A bag of horse dung could be sold for 2 copper nars. Flower beds were built on both sides of the roads, where all kinds of green plants were planted. Flowers bloomed all year round. At the same time, there were fountains on the streets, gardens, and plazas. The streets were full of people. Although it was busy, everything seemed to be in order. The taverns were buzzing with activity. The vodka produced in Northern Town was very popular in the north. Apart from soldiers on vacation, grey dwarves, and guards from other caravans, the grey dwarves were also there. The grey dwarves loved to drink the most. Vodka was a strong liquor, and ordinary people could not drink much of it. The grey dwarves were very satisfied with their current lives. They used to work for the king, but now they worked for Sulan. However, working for Sulan meant that they could get better food and liquor. Their stingy king would not give them vodka. The stubborn, cunning, and tenacious grey dwarves were very loyal to Sulen. After strolling around the taverns, Sulen came to the trade market. The trade market was the most prosperous area in northern town. More than 100 caravans gathered here. Apart from the caravans from the northern provinces, caravans from the southern provinces had also set up their own chambers of commerce here. Even the Desert Kingdom, the Terrence Kingdom, and the Holy Six Lights Alliance in the south had set up offices here. There were dates, carpets, cotton, raisins, dried fruits, and female slaves from the Desert Kingdom, pottery, palm oil, olive oil, wine, and spices from the Holy Six Lights Alliance in the south, and gemstones, obsidian, tea leaves from the Lotus Kingdom. There were all kinds of goods here. Apart from sugar and rum, vodka was also very popular in northern town. It looked clear and transparent, but it tasted like a ball of fire in the mouth. It was very popular in the north. The paper produced in northern town city had become another popular product. At the same time, the quality of weapons in northern town city had improved once again due to the presence of a large group of dwarven blacksmiths. Many merchant groups purposely came to northern town city to buy the high-quality dwarven equipment. Just last month, the business tax collected in northern town had reached over 10,000 kinnar. It could be seen how prosperous northern town was from this tax. Northern town had many names in the mouths of these merchants, such as the City of Wealth, the Pearl of the Northern Kingdoms, and so on. They also praised the few magnificent buildings in northern town. The most famous ones were the Arc de Triomphe and the Aqueduct system. The Arc de Triomphe was majestic and magnificent, and the aqueduct system was also called a miracle. The harvest altar was mysterious because Sulen did not allow people to get close to it. It was said that after King Henry III of the Kingdom of Florence heard about the Arc de Triomphe, he also announced that such a magnificent building would be built in the central avenue of the city to sing his praises. Sulen walked around the city and went to see the training of the winged dragon knights. After a few months of feeding, these Cryopteras had entered the growth period. Each of them had grown to the size of a bison, and their wingspan was over 5 meters. The nest and training ground they were living in were specially built. Inside, other than the +15 comfortable environment, +15 training progress, +18 energy recovery, +17 coordination, there were also the +18 accelerated growth, +20 sturdiness, and other rare attributes. According to the growth rate of these Cryopteras, they would reach adulthood in less than 4 years. Perhaps in 2 or 3 years, northern town would have a squad of winged dragon knights. When Sulen returned to the castle, Alex had returned from the Eagle Fortress. She looked like a queen now. With the support of northern town's resources, as the queen of the harpies, her appearance had skyrocketed. She looked very elegant. Sulen felt a sense of accomplishment every time he discussed the true meaning of life. She and the little succubus were the strongest fighters among Sulen's maids. "Alex, how are the harpies doing lately? Are there any problems?" Sulen asked with a smile. "The children love the nest master built," Alex said excitedly. Also, another harpy leader has become a harpy recently. Although Sulen's eagle nest didn't have a high effect of evolution, there were thousands of harpies. It was normal for 1 or 2 of them to evolve. During this time, the harpies had also cooperated with the soldiers of northern battlefront city to train and fight. They had also gained a lot of combat experience. "Master, the eagle nest has consumed a lot of food recently," Alex said. "Go find Chris later and ask her to send you some food," Sulen nodded. "Oh, right. Go and choose the weapons you want to use. I'll ask the blacksmith to produce them and send them to you." Since the harpies' arms and wings were connected, it was inconvenient for them to use weapons. However, once they evolved into harpies, their arms would be separated from their wings. That way, they could use weapons. Bows, javelins, spears, etc. "But they'll be lighter," Alex said after thinking for a moment. As aerial units, these weapons were very suitable for them. Alright, I understand. After returning to the castle, Su Len arranged everything. He asked people to collect materials for the teleportation circle. At the same time, the construction of the wizard tower was put on the agenda. The wizard tower required a large amount of obsidian. There were no obsidian mines in the northern citadel. The obsidian mines in the underground world were also poor. If they wanted to obtain a large amount of obsidian, they would have to go to the caravans of the Loftus Kingdom. Su Len asked the city hall to sign a long-term supply contract with the merchants of the Loftus Kingdom. He was ready to buy a large amount of obsidian. It was important to know that not only did the wizard tower need obsidian, but also the restoration of the secret realm in the future. Hathaway was also preparing to build some obsidian stone statues and ghost statues. This would require even more obsidian. The cost of building a wizard tower was at least a few million kinnar. Fortunately, Su Len had made a fortune. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to support his girlfriend. There was a question in the noble circle. How did it feel to have a witch as a lover or a wife? Thanks for the invitation. She was in the northern citadel. Su Len could tell him that it was best not to look for a witch if they didn't have a net worth of tens of millions. It was too expensive. Also, it was not recommended to try it if their body wasn't strong enough. In other words, witches had to be normal, beautiful, and proficient in all kinds of spells. They always liked to add some fun when exploring the mysteries of life. For example, grease, shape-shifting, shadow tentacles, giant transformation, shrinking, and so on. If you were strong enough, it would definitely be a pleasure. Chapter 245. The basic materials for building the teleportation array were quickly prepared. Su Len finally built the teleportation array in the mayor's mansion. At the same time, Hathaway's wizard tower would also be built next to the lord's castle. According to Hathaway's blueprint, the height of the wizard tower would eventually reach 120 meters. It would cover an area larger than the lord's mansion. This wizard tower would be big enough for a legendary wizard. Su Len thought about it and agreed. After all, Hathaway was destined to become a legendary wizard, and the construction speed of the wizard tower was not fast. If he built an ordinary wizard tower, Hathaway might become a legendary wizard in a few years. It would be better to build it directly. In fact, this 120-meter tall wizard tower was still dwarfed by the wizard towers of the Arcane Kingdom. The wizard towers of the Arcane Kingdom were basically 300 meters tall. This was because many wizard towers were upgraded to become floating cities. However, most wizard towers did not receive this treatment in the end. To build a floating city, not to mention other costs, the cost of the basic construction and materials was almost 100 million kinnar. In addition to the various facilities of the floating city, even in the era of the Arcane Kingdom, after thousands of years of accumulation, the number of floating cities was not more than 100. It was a huge empire that spanned more than a dozen dimensions. In addition to the obsidian, a lot of steel was also needed to build the wizard tower. The current steel production in North City was not bad. Fortunately, the construction of the wizard tower was gradual. Otherwise, steel would also have to be purchased. After preparing the materials, Su Len bought the void break stone from the system shop and then built it with Hathaway. In fact, the cost of a single teleportation array was only 200,000 kinnar. The price of a group teleportation array rose to 1 million kinnar. As the main city of Su Len, it was necessary to build a group teleportation array. Although a single teleportation array was convenient, cheap, and energy-consuming, it did not make much sense if it could not quickly teleport an army. With the experience in the secret realm last time, Su Len and Hathaway quickly built the teleportation array. They linked the teleportation array with the secret realm's teleportation array, and they could directly teleport from North City to the secret realm. After completing the teleportation portal, Su Len brought Hathaway, Chris, and Alex to the secret realm. The concentration of elemental energy here is so high. As soon as he entered, Alex felt something different. Of course, there's an intermediate elemental pool here, Sulan explained. What do you think? This secret realm covers an area of more than 300 square kilometers. Now, it all belongs to us, Sulan said excitedly. Now, you can all choose a piece of land to use. The secret realm was over 300 square kilometers in size and had a diameter of about 20 kilometers. It was about the size of a small city in Feng Lin's previous life. There were mountains, rivers, and forests in this secret realm. The ancient arcanists used their powerful technology to create a perfect ecosystem here. Although most of the ecosystem was destroyed because of the war, there was a backup in Tower Spirit number 1. It just needed to be repaired. Really? I'll have to think about how to use it, Alex said happily. Master, welcome back. Tower Spirit number 1's voice sounded. Hello, Tower Spirit. Set their level of authority to level 5. The highest level of authority in the secret realm was level 6, which was Sulan and Hathaway. Level 1 authority was the lowest, which was only for tourists. Level 2 authority was for ordinary staff here, mostly apprentices. They could only move around in the living and working areas. Level 3 authority was much better, and he could live here. Only official wizards could obtain this authority, but there were still many areas that he could not enter. Level 4 authority was equivalent to the manager of each area. In the secret plane, apart from the most important areas, he could enter the rest. As for level 5 authority, there were basically no restrictions. Yes, Master. Setting authority. Setting complete. A beam of blue light shone on Chrissy and Alex. This light could record their appearance, energy waves, smell, and even their soul imprint. This technique was also a masterpiece of the ancient arcanists. The wizards of today still couldn't do it. Master, the space-folding portal of the secret realm has been repaired, but the other functions of the secret realm are still incomplete. Please fix it as soon as possible, Tower Spirit number 1 reminded. Got it. Sulan had a headache. Repairing the secret realm and building wizard towers required a lot of resources and manpower. Sulan could find and buy resources, but he was seriously short of manpower. Master, you can try to repair the golems. There are still 56 steel golems in the secret realm. 33 of them are worth repairing. You can replace the parts from the other damaged golems, Tower Spirit number 1 suggested. There are still so many golems. Sulan's eyes flashed. He knew about the steel golems. A complete steel golem was a level 4-1. Not only did it have energy, but it was also very strong in close combat. It was very good except for the lack of air combat. The last time he encountered a steel golem, it didn't have enough energy, so many of its functions were not activated. But now, with the elemental pool, there was no need to worry about energy. After learning that there were 33 steel golems that could be repaired, Sulan immediately took Hathaway, Chris, and Alex to collect all the remains of the steel golems. Master, the secret realm needs a lot of manpower. I'll ask the harpies to come and help, Alex said. Alex had absolute control over the harpies, so there was no need to worry about them betraying her. Besides, the harpies were quite strong. Sulan thought about it and agreed. I'll build a new eagle nest for them in the secret realm. Thank you, Master. Alex suddenly hugged Sulan and kissed him. She then smiled and left through the teleportation portal. About an hour later, the teleportation portal lit up again. Alex brought 20 harpies to the secret realm. After evolution, the harpies were very similar to humans. Except for the wings and the claws on their feet, they were not much different from humans. However, when they evolved into elite harpies, their claws would become feet. At that time, they would be similar to Alex. However, none of the harpies had reached that level yet. Su Lan let the harpies clean up the ruins according to Tower Spirit No. 1's repair plan. He, Hathaway, and Alex worked together to repair the steel golems. As for Chris, she stayed in the secret realm for a while and then returned to Northern Battlefront City. After all, the city needed her now. The first to be repaired were the steel golems that Su Lan and Hathaway destroyed last time. Those few steel golems were the least damaged. As long as the energy centers were reconnected and the broken legs were repaired, they would be fine. The control centers of the golems were originally with Tower Spirit No. 1. After Su Lan became the master of the secret realm and obtained the highest authority, he also obtained the right to command the golems. Some of the control centers of the golems were damaged. Hathaway had to use large soul crystals to make new ones. Fortunately, only a few of the control centers were damaged. Otherwise, Sullen's few large soul crystals would not be enough. After more than an hour, the first steel golem was finally repaired. Tower Spirit No. 1, open the energy channel and charge this golem. Yes, Master. With Sullen's order, the energy channel in the elemental pool opened. A gust of blue elemental energy was transferred to the steel golem through the energy channel. After receiving the energy, the steel golem's dark eyes slowly lit up. The golem was reactivated. Steel guard No. 027 is activated. Charging, activation complete. Master, steel guard No. 027 is at your service. Check if there are any problems with the golem, Su Lan ordered. Begin self-examination. Self-examination complete. The golem is in good condition. Looks like it's done. Su Lan nodded with satisfaction. Tower Spirit No. 1, give it a job. Yes, Master. Then, Tower Spirit No. 1 began to assign tasks to the steel golems. The steel golems in the Arcana land were all-purpose golems. They could be used for both fighting and work. As long as there was an energy supply, these steel golems did not need to rest at all and could work continuously. With these steel golems, the repair work in the Arcana land would be much faster. Next, Su Lan and the other two continued to repair the golems. With the experience of the first golem, the repair of the next few golems was much faster. These golems were all damaged in the same place, so the repair was not difficult. 3 hours later, the other 3 steel golems were all repaired. After they were reactivated, these golems were assigned to work. While repairing the golems, Su Lan once again gained experience in magical craftsmanship. He felt that it would not be long before he could master this craftsmanship. The craftsmanship of the steel golems was still very complicated. Su Lan and Hathaway could not understand many parts. It was several times more complicated than the craftsmanship of the stone golems. Although they did not understand some of the craftsmanship, it did not affect the repair. The repair plan given by Tower Spirit No. 1 was very detailed. Most of the time, they would directly remove parts from the scrapped steel golems and replace them. The parts in these steel golems were basically universal. According to Tower Spirit No. 1, these steel golems were products produced by the same golem production line. The repaired steel golems began to clean up the ruins in the Arcana land. These ruins needed to be rebuilt. The building materials were not discarded and would be used to repair other buildings. At the same time, a large number of skeletons in the Arcana land also needed to be cleaned up. There were many undead creatures in the Arcana land. These undead creatures also needed to be cleaned up. All the skeletons would be sent out for burial. The undead aura in the Arcana land also needed to be cleaned up. Otherwise, undead creatures would still be born. Chapter 246. Most of the ecosystem in the secret mirror had been damaged, and it would take some time to rebuild it. However, with 33 steel golems, Su Lan only needed to provide the materials and let the tower genie command the golems to work. Only the work that the steel golems couldn't do would be done by Su Lan and Hathaway. The working capacity of more than 30 steel golems had surpassed that of a construction team of more than 1,000 people. These steel golems were all powerful and tireless. After giving the task of repairing the secret realm to Tower Spirit No. 1, Su Luan began to prepare for the planting area. He was going to plant some commonly used magic plants in the planting area, but he didn't have many magic plant seeds, so he could only plant them as he collected them. Also, the work of planting magic plants could not be done by steel golems. It could only be done by humans. Many magic plants were dangerous, so normal people couldn't plant them. Only wizard apprentices could do it. Su Luan didn't build a wizard academy, so he didn't have so many free labor. However, he had his own way. Alex's harpies were very good. Although they were not wizard apprentices, they were quite strong. They could take care of magic plants. The only problem was that there were not many of them. The planting area opened up in the secret mirror was very large, and it was impossible to plant everything with only a few people. A secret mirror like this was more than enough to support a wizard organization. In the planting area, Su Luan gave the seeds of Peace Bloom, Golden Thorn, Silver Star, and more than a dozen other magic plant seeds to the harpies for them to plant. Many places in the planting area had not been repaired, but it was not urgent. Maybe when he was strong enough, Su Luan would build a wizard academy. After returning from the secret mirror, Su Luan finally remembered that the messenger from the Kingdom of Florence was still waiting to see him. Su Luan could guess the purpose of the messenger's visit. It was most likely about his title. "Ask the messenger from the Kingdom of Florence to see me," Su Luan said to the servant next to him. "Yes, sir." Soon, the servant brought a middle-aged man in his 30s to Su Luan's study. "Good day, Your Excellency Su Luan." The middle-aged man bowed elegantly. "Good day, I'm sorry to have kept Mr. Messenger waiting for so long. The territory has just been established, and there are many things that need to be done." Su Luan apologized, but there was no apologetic expression on his face. "We understand that His Excellency Su Luan is busy." "Right, what's your name?" "Robert Monroe, nice to meet you, Mr. Su Luan," Robert said with a smile. "Please sit down, Mr. Robert. I wonder what brings Mr. Messenger to this remote place." Su Luan continued after inviting him to sit down. "Sir Su Luan is too humble. Even a child in the Northern Lands has heard of the title of the Pearl of the Northern Lands." Robert shook his head. "The bards in Cult are singing about your heroic deeds. You are very famous in the Northern Lands. At first, I thought they were exaggerating, but after coming to Northern City, I realized that the rumors were not exaggerated at all. You have created a miracle. In just 1 year, you have built such a big city in the wilderness." Hearing Robert's compliment, Su Luan immediately raised his guard. Robert was the messenger of the kingdom, so there was no need for him to curry favor with him. Now, he was lowering himself so much. No one would believe that he had nothing to ask for. The sugar, rum, and paper in Northern City are all in high demand in the Kingdom of Florence. What you see is just the surface. Northern Citadel is on the verge of collapsing. To prevent the monsters from attacking, I have to form a huge army. Northern Citadel's army now accounts for 1/3 of its population. Most importantly, these soldiers aren't farmers. They are all professional soldiers. The cost every month is making my heart ache, Su Luan said, shaking his head. Although he was complaining, it was more like he was trying to show off his muscles. Many people want to experience this kind of pain, but they can't. Robert shook his head. "I am here to invite you on behalf of the Royal Parliament," Robert said with a smile. Robert smiled and said, "Mr. Surin, you've successfully opened up a new territory, and it's developing well. The noble parliament has approved your achievement. You can now design your own family badge and go to Cult to receive your title. I remember that the standard for successful development is 3 to 5 years. I don't think I have reached the standard yet." Su Luan was not happy about being recognized by the royal parliament. Instead, he asked calmly. According to the kingdom's standard, it will take 3 to 5 years. But your territory is developing so well that the royal parliament has approved that you don't have to wait 3 years. Robert shook his finger. I see. Su Luan nodded in agreement. However, he knew that this was just a piece of paper. There were some merchants who wanted to obtain aristocratic status. The best way to do so was to buy a land expansion order, find a place to develop, and then spend money to bribe the aristocratic parliament to recognize them as aristocrats. They didn't care about territory, they just wanted to obtain aristocratic status. Of course, you have to know that we are taking a huge risk by doing this. So, we need your support. Robert winked at Su Len and gave him a knowing look. However, Robert was going to be disappointed. He and the royal parliament did not know that Su Len had never thought of gaining their recognition. Su Len had planned to build a new kingdom from the very beginning. Joining the royal parliament and gaining the rights to develop a territory as well as the title of a count was not something that Su Len had planned to accept from the very beginning. If he accepted their title, it would mean that Su Len had joined the kingdom of Florence. If it was just for the title, he could have done it with his legendary level strength. There was no need for him to go through so much trouble to develop a territory in the north. However, Su Len did not plan to fall out with the kingdom of Florence. After all, more than half of the trade routes to the northern city had to pass through the provinces in the north. Moreover, the northern city gained a large number of people from the provinces in the north every month. If they fell out with the kingdom of Florence, not only would the trade routes be blocked, but the recruitment of refugees would also be interrupted. Of course, even if they fell out with the kingdom of Florence, there would still be trade routes coming to Su Len. However, the price would definitely be affected. They would take the opportunity to lower the price and sell it at a high price under the pretext of the border blockade. There was no doubt about that. There had been such cases in the history of his previous life and the history of this world. The most classic example was the sea ban policy of the Ming dynasty in his previous life. On one hand, they were trying to stop the country from opening up the sea. On the other hand, they were trying to smuggle goods. They used the sea ban to kill all their competitors and monopolize the unimaginable profits. Thank you so much, but I have too many things to do in my territory now. I can't leave for the time being, so I can't go to Calent City to accept the title. Su Len was overjoyed at first, but then he looked regretful. His acting was so good that he could win an Oscar. Well, but to thank the royal parliament for their help, I can give you 3 trade quotas. Each quota allows you to buy 50 kilograms of sugar and 100 barrels of rum from the northern city every month. Su Len offered the bait. Su Len did not know how many people there were in the royal parliament, but they would definitely fight for the 3 quotas. Based on the royal parliament's character, as long as there were enough benefits, they would not care who you were. These quotas were enough for the royal parliament to fight for a while. As for the 3 quotas, it was not a loss for Su Len at all. Since last month, the sugar beets planted in the northern city had started to mature batch after batch. The production of the northern city sugar refinery had increased from 600 kilograms of sugar per month to 1,000 kilograms of sugar per month, and this number was still increasing. Su Len estimated that the production of sugar would exceed a ton in 2 months at most. With more sugar, there would naturally be a need for more trading quotas. Giving them 3 quotas would not only show their friendliness, but also bring them benefits. Why not? Hearing that Su Luan could give them 3 trading quotas, Robert was overjoyed. After all, the aristocratic parliament had been jealous of the previous caravans for a long time because they had monopolized the sugar trade in the northern town and made a lot of money. If it were not for the fact that those caravans were backed by big nobles, they would have snatched them long ago. Now that they had 3 quotas from Su Len, it was naturally the best outcome. Of course, there are conditions for these 3 quotas as well. Seeing Robert's uncontrollable excitement, Su Len smiled in his heart. Northern City is preparing to train some grassroots officials, and we lack some scholars as teachers. Therefore, I hope that the nobles with the quotas can help me find some scholars to teach in the Northern City. They don't need to be famous scholars, as long as they can teach basic education. No problem, Sir Sulen. We will send the scholars you need over soon. Hearing Sulen's request, Robert did not mind at all. Although there were not many literate scholars in this era, there were many of them in the circle of nobles. After all, many people learned these things to serve the nobles. Moreover, many of the nobles' children had received education and could be teachers. As long as they were willing, they could easily find a few hundred scholars. Then I look forward to working with you, Sulen said with a smile. I look forward to working with you. Robert was also full of smiles, as if he had earned a great deal. Sulen laughed in his heart. Although you earn money, I will not lose money. Chapter 247. After discussing the matter with Robert, Sulen signed 3 blank trade permits, and Robert left in a hurry. Since the dimensional folding circle of the mysterious realm had been repaired, the Northgard Castle soldiers outside the mysterious realm had all retreated. The Northgard city's army was mobilized again. In the wilderness where the Northgard city was located, there were no more powerful factions that could fight a large-scale war against them. Most of the time, there were only small skirmishes. The monsters in the wilderness were like weeds. If you were not careful, they could grow very quickly. Summer was the time when food was the most abundant in the northern wilderness. The number of kobolds, goblins, and gnolls had started to increase. To deal with the situation, Sulen changed the way the army fought. Lancers, archers, centaur riders, and the newly recruited harpies were reorganized into small armies. They were then led by their own generals to clean up the areas around the Northgard city. The Northgard city had started to clear out the monsters and bandits in their territory again. Of course, it was not realistic to completely wipe out the kobolds, goblins, and gnolls. After all, these races were very good at reproducing. They could only reproduce in groups. Sulen's plan was to keep their numbers to a low level. After a few years, the number of goblins, kobolds, and gnolls would gradually decrease. Just like in the southern provinces, there were basically no gnolls left in the wilderness. Even the number of kobolds and goblins was very low. It was the result of decades of hard work. If the other nobles could do it, so could Sulen. Moreover, he had a strategic map. As long as the goblins, kobolds, and bandits were discovered, they would be marked on the map. Since the battlefield was one-sided and transparent, it was not difficult to eliminate these bandits. With the help of the harpies, the vision of the northern fortress city's army had increased by a few times. Their current strategy had changed from a rain of arrows and spearmen to an aerial assault by the harpies, archers, and centaurs. Most of the time, there were not many enemies left by the time the spearmen reached the front line. The uninjured monsters were enslaved, and the injured ones were killed for experience. While the northern battlefront city army was cleaning up, Sulen also came to the training ground of the formation breaker outside the city. After this period of training, this group of Imperial Spear Guards had all completed their training. Today was the day they would advance to the formation breaker. The success rate of the formation breaker's advancement was only 1/5. Sulen gave each of the Spear Guards a light ball and let them advance. Time went by. This time, there were as many as 16 Spear Guards who participated in the advancement. Sulen waited quietly outside. After about 15 minutes, light balls began to return to the tiger-shaped tally of the formation breaker, which meant that someone had failed to advance. Sulen was mentally prepared for this result. Soon, 2 more light balls returned to Sulen within a few minutes. As time passed, more and more light balls returned to Sulen's hand. Very quickly, the time had already reached the last 10 minutes. The advancement of the capture barracks, as long as they could endure through this last period of time, it represented that they had successfully advanced. It was just that there were only 5 people remaining. Just then, Su Luan felt that another light ball had returned to the tiger tally, and there were only 4 people who were still advancing. Time passed by. Su Lan became more and more nervous. Soon, there were only 5 minutes left. A light flashed and disappeared. Another light ball returned. In the end, there were only 3 people left. In the last 5 minutes, Su Lan felt like a year. Finally, the system's notification sounded in his ears. Congratulations, host. 3 of your spear guards have successfully advanced to the formation breaker. The current number of formation breaker is 5. Seeing the 3 soldiers who had successfully advanced, Sullen's mood finally became better. Just as the northern battlefront city was developing rapidly, further north in the northern wilderness, the power of the elemental tide was constantly spreading. A large number of wild beasts had evolved into demon beasts. The races that lived here also felt threatened. Chief Rogthus, the team that went to the Great Glacier to explore, has returned. They brought back the latest news. In a huge tent, several orcs were discussing something. Outside the tent, tens of thousands of orcs were living in the wilderness. Since the last era, the orcs had been expelled by the humans, elves, and dwarves. They could only live in the barren northern wilderness. However, the orcs still did not give up on the fertile land in the south. Every 2 or 3 years, the orcs would carry out a large-scale invasion to the south. Every time this happened, the countries that bordered the northern wilderness would be the target of the orcs' attack. There was no strict border between the northern wilderness and the orcs. However, most of them relied on the terrain of the mountains to defend. Usually, the orcs would directly invade the southern wilderness. The northern battlefront city was not located on the main route of the orcs' army. When the northern battlefront city was first built, Su Lan did not choose the north. Instead, he chose the northeast. He did not want to be the front line against the orcs. "Hera, how is the Great Glacier now?" the tall orc chief asked. "Chief, the situation is not good. We found traces of a white dragon," the orc named Hera said. After hearing Hera's words, the orc chief went silent for a moment and said, "Great shaman, it seems your prophecy was right. The situation we are facing now is very clear. In the coming days, more and more orcs will appear here. Our living environment will become more and more difficult. If we want the tribe to continue, there is only one way, and that is to go south. Citizens of Gawushan, now is the time of life and death. I, the chief of the Blackfire tribe, Rogthus, am officially telling you that we must obtain more fertile land to survive. The weak elves have fallen asleep, and the dwarves' kingdom has been divided. We only have to face the humans. As long as we defeat the humans, we can obtain the warm and fertile land under the sun. We have been silent for too long. It is time to let those despicable monkeys pay the price. Fight! 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 The other orcs roared. More and more orcs began to roar. Soon, the entire camp had tens of thousands of orcs roaring. Their voices resounded through the sky. At the same time, the other orc tribes in the northern wilderness began to move at the same time. In the northern wilderness, the number of orcs living was no less than 1 million. According to the characteristics of all orcs being soldiers, they could easily form an army of 500,000 to 600,000. However, the beastmen usually didn't do this. The most fundamental reason was logistics. The beastmen didn't have enough food. If hundreds of thousands of beastmen gathered together, it wouldn't take long for them to starve to death. Therefore, the beastmen would usually unite with several tribes and form an army of around 50,000 people. They would then attack from multiple areas. The orcs began to move. A new round of war was about to begin. After dealing with the matters in the northern city, Su Lan issued an order to purchase all kinds of magic plant seeds. At the same time, he began the next step of the restoration of the secret realm. There were many magic plants growing in the secret realm. In addition to the purple tulips, there were also mutated man-eating flowers, blood-sucking vines, and some amethyst bees. The ecological area in the secret realm had also begun to be restored. There were many wild herbs in the ecological area. Some of the herbs marked in Introduction to Potionology could be found here. Most of the magic plants were easy to deal with. The only troublesome one was the blood-sucking vines. These dark red thorny vines were a type of living vine. They would automatically attack nearby creatures. At the same time, they were poisonous. After killing their prey, they would drag it over and slowly digest it. The ecological area was very large. Although the original destruction was serious, it was slowly recovering. Earth, water, wind, fire. The Arcanists believed that these four elements were the basic composition of the world. They were also the prerequisite for the evolution of all matter. As the wizards who inherited the knowledge of the arcane empire, they also inherited this view. It was said that some legendary wizards would leave the main material plane and enter the astral world to roam other worlds. These wizards were called astral wizards. According to the information left behind by these astral wizards, they found that there were all kinds of planets. Some were solid, some were liquid, and some were gaseous. However, planets that could produce intelligent life had a kind of life force. Almost all of them had the characteristics of a fusion of these three types of planets. The great Arcanists believed that at the beginning of the multiverse, after the explosion of the source energy, the elemental planes of earth, water, wind, and fire were created. During the evolution, different types of planets were created due to the proportion of the elements. Those planets that could support life were mostly the result of the harmony of the four elements. Only this kind of harmonious plane could give birth to all kinds of creatures and finally become a prosperous plane. At the same time, the Arcanists' theory of constructing superlarge demiplanes originated from this. The Grand Arcanists believed that only a complete elemental balance could create a new world, a superlarge demiplane that could allow life to flourish. Creating a world was not difficult. Basically, if a legendary wizard was willing to spend his life, he could create a relatively small half-plane world. However, no wizard would do so. The environment in the secret realm also had to comply with this requirement. If there was a problem with the ecological structure of the secret realm, it would collapse and be rebuilt. However, if there was a problem with the basic elemental structure, it would lead to the collapse of the secret realm. Therefore, Sulan had been strict when it came to restoring the secret realm. Chapter 248. Sulan was lying on the sofa in the castle at the center of the arcane mystery realm. He was watching a movie, not a movie, but a video. Tower Spirit Number 1 stored a large amount of information about the arcane mystery realm. These were the system backups left behind by the Arcanists. It was a timely help for Sulan to restore the arcane mystery realm. A 3D virtual image appeared in front of him. The 3D movies in his previous life were nothing compared to this. Thinking about the 3D movies in his previous life, other than the font being 3D, the image was basically no different from 2D. Moreover, there were all kinds of flaws. Looking at the 3D imaging technology of the Arcanists, it was like being in the real world. It was a waste to use this technology only to broadcast information. Fortunately, Sulan was a decent person. If those LSPs got their hands on this, they would watch movies every day. This is incredible. Sulan praised as he looked at the 3D image played by Tower Spirit Number 1. Although he had already overestimated the power of the Arcanists, he was still shocked by what he saw. In the final image of the ecological modification spell, there were wyverns, pterosaurs, and birds flying in the sky. On the ground, there were saber-toothed tigers, mammoths, gale tigers, flaming wildebeests, and other magical beasts strolling leisurely. These huge beasts walked past him as if they were alive. A mammoth walked right through Sulen. Its long trunk easily pulled out a small tree and brought it to its mouth. The mammoth took a few bites. Perhaps it didn't taste good, so it swung its trunk and threw it away. On the grassland, a saber-toothed tiger was lying on the ground. It quietly moved forward for a while before leaping out in an instant. The bison that was drinking water fled in fear. The saber-toothed tiger was very fast. It pounced on a strong bison and used its terrifying fangs to bite off the struggling bison's neck. All kinds of animals were vividly displayed in the image. Not only were there images, but there were also voices. The roars of the beasts and the rustling of the leaves in the wind were vivid. In addition to the creatures Sulen knew, there were many creatures that Sulen had never seen before. Those creatures were most likely extinct by now. The scene in front of him looked like a lush forest. Tower Spirit Number 1, do you have the technical information for this kind of virtual 3D imaging technology? Sulen asked directly. I'm sorry, Master. The virtual 3D imaging technology is not in the technical backup, so there is no information about it. Tower Spirit Number 1's voice sounded. What a pity. Sulen said with regret. However, although there is no information about virtual 3D imaging technology in the data, this technology is an improved version of magic image recording and sound recording. Master, you can research in this direction. I understand. Sulen nodded. Image was a 4th-tier spell and required a crystal to cast, but the image stored was very blurry. He didn't expect the Tower Spirit to use it so well and so vividly. However, now that he knew the spell, he could slowly improve it in the future. If the improvement was successful, he planned to make a movie in the other world. There were elves, beastmen, centaurs, and winged people. With so many fantasy races, the movie would definitely be profitable. I'm talking about a proper movie. 36D, Pui, cross it out. It's a 3D surround image. Just thinking about it makes me excited. This way, the people of the other world would have a lot of mental food. There was simply too little entertainment in this world. The reason why bards were popular was because they could perform, sing, and tell stories. In this world, even a circus was enough to make people go crazy. If Sulen made a movie, people would be so shocked that their jaws would drop. When the time came, he might as well set up a film company and call it *********. However, these were all things for the future. Sulen didn't have the technology now. What he needed to do now was to rebuild the ecosystem of the secret plane according to the backup information of the ecological system of the Tower Spirit. In fact, it wasn't easy to build an independent ecosystem in a secret plane. This experiment was done by a country in his previous life. Back then, the United States spent a lot of money to build a laboratory called Biosphere 2. It was a closed space where various plants and animals were planted. At the same time, a few scientists were put in to form a simple ecosystem. In this experiment, some technology was used to help the ecosystem cycle. The whole plan was to live in the Biosphere 2 laboratory for 5 years. However, the experiment only lasted for a year before it had to be stopped. Because the ecosystem inside had collapsed, all the plants and animals could no longer survive. The technology in his previous life couldn't be completed even when he transmigrated to Sulen. However, in this fantasy world, the Arcanists had solved these problems thousands of years ago. Sulen looked at the biosphere modification technology that the Tower Spirit mentioned. Just looking at the technology made Sulen's scalp tingle. Terrain modification: use magic to modify the ground into the shape you want. The lowest level is 7, and the highest level is 10. Environment modification: permanently change the environment of a space or place. The more the environment is modified, the more difficult the spell is. The lowest level is 5, and the highest level is 10. Ecological recombination: permanently change the ecology of an area. The creatures in the area, the highest level is 15, will be changed according to the caster's wishes. The lowest level is 9, and the highest level is 10. Gene Cultivation, a magical spell combined with cloning. Can use the genes of some creatures to directly create the original creatures. Note, this spell can only create normal creatures. It has no effect on magic creatures. Level 8 Spell. Gene Recombination, a powerful spell invented by the Arcanists. This spell can use existing genes to create new creatures. Note, this spell is very dangerous. Please use it with caution. Level 9 Spell. Bloodline Modification, a bloodline modification technique invented by the Arcanists. It can allow a normal creature to have the abilities of other creatures. Note, this spell is easy to cause bloodline diseases. Please use it with caution. Level 7 Spell. When Sulen saw the last two spells, he was shocked. This kind of spell was strictly limited even during the Arcane Empire. When this kind of spell was first invented, it was all the rage. However, it soon led to serious consequences. The most typical examples of this kind of gene recombination and bloodline modification were the Beastmen and Bloodline Wizards. The Beastmen were first created by some Arcanists. Sulen didn't know the specific reason. Under normal circumstances, the bloodline of the Beastmen was very unstable, and there were often various problems. However, the Beastmen also had talents that ordinary people didn't have. For example, as long as the cat Beastmen reached adulthood, their agility would generally exceed 20. The bear Beastman's strength was also generally outstanding. Later, for some reason, this kind of gene recombination technology was banned by the Arcane Empire. As for the bloodline modification technique, this kind of technology was generally used on the Arcanists themselves. Many of the Arcanists' descendants didn't have the ability to cast spells, so they invented this kind of technology so that their descendants could have the bloodline ability and become warlocks. In addition to these technologies, there were various weather spells in the technical information, which could change the seasonal climate in the secret realm. These spells could almost be used to transform a half-bit wall into a large secret realm. Of course, the manpower and material resources needed were far from what 1 or 2 wizards could do. Even legendary wizards couldn't do it. Only a dozen legendary wizards working together could achieve that kind of world-like miracle. Sulen's current secret realm was, of course, not so exaggerated. Although his secret realm covered a large area, it was essentially different from the half-bitwall secret realms. The half-bitwall secret realms could exist independently and didn't need to be attached to the main plane. Sulen's secret realm of space folding was just using space spells to hide a piece of land in the material plane. Overall, it still belonged to the material plane. Although this kind of secret realm couldn't be compared to the half-bitwall secret realm, one advantage was that there was no need to reconstruct the terrain, the air and gravity system of the secret realm didn't need to be reconstructed, and there was no need to open up space or half-bitwall. The difficulty of construction was sharply reduced. The energy barrier used to divide the area in the secret realm had been damaged. This kind of energy barrier could divide the secret realm according to one's ideas. The strength of the energy barrier could withstand a legendary spell attack. Many areas must be divided with this kind of spell, such as the planting area. There were all kinds of high-value magic plants planted there. Once they weren't taken care of and were destroyed by other animals, it would be a big loss. There was also the need to build an ecological park in the secret realm. Many magic creatures couldn't be bred like cattle and sheep. They must be given a wild environment. The ecological park was specially prepared for this kind of magic beast. Some magic plants also needed to be bred in the wild. According to the materials given by Tower Spirit No. 1, such an energy barrier to divide the secret realm would cost at least 5 million kinnar. Even if Sulen had obtained all of the Grey Dwarf's treasures, it would be painful to take out such a large sum of money. Half of the treasure he got from the Grey Dwarf would be used up in an instant. As for the space-folding circle and the large protective force field that surrounded the secret realm, it would cost an astronomical amount of money to rebuild these two runic circles bit by bit. Su Lin used to think that he was quite rich. If he released the money in his hands, he could destroy the economy of a country. Now, it seemed that he was thinking too much. With so little money, he couldn't even build a secret realm. 10 million kinar wasn't too high a price to build a wizard tower for Hathaway. Chapter 249. Because the terrain of the secret realm hadn't changed much, Su Lin could repair it according to the information given by Tower Spirit 1. He didn't need to change the terrain or the environment. This greatly reduced the difficulty of repairing the secret realm. The biosphere in the secret mirror was a bit more difficult to build. Normal animals were fine, but he needed a lot of magical beasts. The Tower Spirit also stored a lot of genes. If Su Lin could use gene cultivation or cloning spells, he could directly create them. However, these two spells were both Circle 8 and Circle 9 spells. Only legendary wizards could master them. Even Hathaway was still one level away. Su Lin also found some dragon genes. Of course, they weren't real dragons. They were dinosaurs that had gone extinct in his previous world. There were some dinosaurs in the wild, such as velociraptors, Spinosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, and so on. However, most of them lived in the south. In some of the wilds in the south, these dinosaurs were considered tyrants. It was said that these dinosaurs first came out of the secret mirror. There were no dinosaurs in this realm, but the Arcanists captured a lot of dinosaurs from other realms for research. These dinosaurs were quite strong. For example, the velociraptors were level 10 and had a challenge rating of level 5. It would take a few nights to take care of them. However, the velociraptors lived in groups of 3 to 6. There were no grand knights to take care of them. As for the Tyrannosaurus, it was level 17. It was stronger than a lot of your own. Of course, there weren't many dinosaurs at this level. There were also some dinosaurs that could no longer be called dinosaurs. They had some dragon blood in them, and their bodies had mutated. Su Lin didn't know if the ancient Arcanists had done some blood modification experiments on them, but he guessed it was very likely. Although the secret mirror was severely damaged, some parts of the equipment were still preserved. They could be used again after some repairs. In order to create a suitable environment in the ecological garden, all kinds of rune circles were needed. These rune circles were in a stagnant state because of the interruption of energy. Many runic matrices could no longer be used after a long time of aging. They needed to be remade. Su Lin had mastered many runes during this period of time. He repaired many runic matrices according to the repair standards given by Tower Spirit No. 1 and reconnected them to the energy channel. After spending some time in the secret territory, Su Lin returned to Northern Town City to rest. There was a lot of work to be done in the secret territory, so he could only do it bit by bit. Su Lin did not want to be so busy that he did not even have time to rest. The land next to the Lord's castle had been cleared out after a period of work. The land was now very busy. The workers were digging the foundation. The foundation of the wizard tower was more than 100 meters tall. Naturally, it was very important. Hathaway's wizard tower was built with 3 floors. The bottom floor was the dungeon, used to lock up some prisoners or magical beasts. The second floor was the elemental pool, and the first floor was the utility room and ordinary warehouse. The wizard tower on the ground was divided into 7 floors. The first floor was the living room and the servants' living quarters. The second floor was the guest room and the wizard apprentices' room. The third floor was the battle training ground and the spell training ground. The fourth floor was where the apprentices were taught and where the magic statues were stored. The fifth floor was Hathaway's laboratory. The sixth floor was where Hathaway lived and where the treasury was located. The seventh floor was the observatory of the wizard tower. It was also the control center of the wizard tower. The weapon system of the wizard tower would also be installed there. The blueprint of the wizard tower had been determined long ago. It would take at least a few years to build such a huge wizard tower with the current power of Northern Town City. The construction of the wizard tower was not too difficult. The difficult part was the engraved runes and all kinds of energy channels. The workers and slaves of Northern Town City could not do this kind of work. Only the wizards could do it themselves. However, Sulan soon discovered that there were not only normal people building the wizard tower, but there were also half-elves and drows. Although they were not wizards, they also had some spellcasting ability. Now that these elves were also involved in the construction of the wizard tower, Sulan was a little surprised. However, he soon realized that both Karina and Grace were spellcasters. Although they were bloodline warlocks, they could also build a wizard tower after entering the 4th grade. However, because of the lack of strength and resources, they did not have a wizard tower at all. Even if they joined Northern Town City, it was impossible to get Sulan to support them in building a wizard tower. The construction of a wizard tower almost bankrupted Northern Town City, let alone building 3 wizard towers. Now that Hathaway was building a wizard tower, they naturally wanted a share of the profits. Although they could not become the owner of the wizard tower, they could still use some areas of the wizard tower. Hathaway naturally agreed to their request. The condition was that they needed to help build the wizard tower. The foundation of the 120-meter wizard tower was a full 30 meters. Thousands of construction teams worked under the supervision of the drows. The soil would be transported to other parts of the city. Under the foundation of the wizard tower, the original soil was turned into rock by using the mud to stone spell. Some places were even blessed with the hardening spell to increase the strength. The base of the wizard tower would be built here. The wizard tower and the base would be connected by a structure. These were reserved for the future upgrade of the wizard tower into a floating space tower. The upgraded form of the wizard tower was the floating space tower. This was the original form of the floating space city. Since the destruction of the Arcane Kingdom, the construction technology of the floating space city had been incomplete, but the technology of the floating space tower had been preserved. A huge amount of energy was needed to make the wizard tower fly. Although the elemental pool could not support the consumption of the floating space city, the consumption of the floating space tower could still support it. The wizard tower of the legendary wizards in this world was basically a floating space tower. The construction of the floating space tower required a lot of mithril, which was not difficult for Sulan who had the mithril mine associated with it. According to the calculation of Bach, the silver mine was a large and rich mine, and there was still a lot of mithril associated with it. Now, except for a part of the mithril used to repair the secret realm, the rest was stored in the treasure house of the Lord's castle. It would be used when the wizard tower was upgraded to a floating space tower. A large amount of steel was transported out of the blacksmith workshop. After being smelted by the blast furnace, the metal processed by the Grey Dwarfs was already steel. The construction of the wizard tower required a lot of steel. A steel skeleton was erected, and a large amount of obsidian was transported. If one had enough money, they could use obsidian to build the whole tower. Just like the Rollin Kingdom, if one had enough money, they could use obsidian to build the city wall. Although Sulan also wanted to use obsidian to build a wizard tower, considering that it also required a lot of money to repair the secret realm, he could only reduce the amount of obsidian used in the wizard tower. Obsidian was only used in some important areas of the wizard tower, and ordinary marble was used in other places. In fact, some wizards who were really poor would use ordinary stones to build the wizard tower. Of course, they could also use soil. First, they would use mud to rock to turn the soil into rocks, and then cast hardening on the rocks. Although it was more troublesome, the strength of the wizard tower was also very high. Of course, the workload of the wizard would increase by many times. The workload was enough to make a wizard chop off his hands. Generally, wizards with a little bit of money would not do this. Only the poor would use this method. The effect of hardening was permanent. Wizards at the level of a great wizard could cast it to make wood as strong as steel. If it was stone, the strength would be even higher. Wizard towers that could really travel to the astral world were built with a large amount of obsidian, and then cast hardening on the basis of the obsidian. The strength of the wizard tower built in this way would reach an extraordinary level. Sulan had sent 2,000 kobolds to the underground world to mine obsidian. However, obsidian was very hard to mine, so other than mining obsidian from the underground world, North Town City had also bought a large amount of obsidian from the Rallen Kingdom. The craftsmen built according to the requirements of the blueprint. The half-elf spellcasters and drows began to cast mud to rock on the rocks and obsidian. Hathaway cast hardening on the rocks, Karina and Grace did the same. In order to speed up the construction of the wizard tower, Hathaway pulled out the clay golems and rock golems she made. When these golems first appeared, the workers were scared out of their wits. The 3-meter-tall rock golems had arms thicker than their waists. When they walked, the ground trembled slightly. It was very oppressive. The workers were very worried that they might accidentally be trampled to death by these golem puppets. However, after a period of familiarity, these workers were no longer afraid of the golem puppets. Instead, they became very curious about these golem puppets. If it weren't for the reputation of the wizards and the power of these golems, these people would have already climbed up to take a look. One had to admit that the humans' ability to adapt was very strong. Since North Town City had started to clear out the monsters in the wilderness, the number of slaves in the territory had skyrocketed again. In less than a month, the army of North Town City had captured more than 10,000 kobolds, goblins, gnolls, and orcs as slaves. Therefore, although a lot of people were used to build the wizard tower, the construction of North Town City did not slow down either. The various public facilities in North Town City were not yet complete. According to Sullen's requirements, all the roads had to be paved with stone or gravel. Now, most of the main roads in the city had been completed, but some of the roads in the market had not yet been completed. Some places in the city had begun to build street gardens and green parks. In the past, to speed up the construction of other buildings, they had to prioritize the construction of other buildings. Now that they had enough manpower, they began to build these on a large scale. Chapter 250. In the northern wastelands, while the northern city was under construction, in the wastelands northwest of the Sierra de Lotus, a large number of orcs were moving southward. Summer was about to pass, and the sun in the sky was not as hot as before. Groups of green-skinned orcs were advancing southward on the barren wastelands. "Chieftain, we don't have much food left," an orc said to Rogessus. Rogessus was silent for a moment. "How much food do we have left?" "Including today's food, it's only enough for us to last a week. It's summer now, and we have to hunt and gather along the way. It'll take us a month at most," the green-skinned orc said. Rogessus's eyes suddenly lit up. "A month. That's enough time. A month later, it'll be the harvest of the southern human kingdoms. As long as we break through the stronghold, the food outside the city will be ours. That's enough for our entire tribe to eat for a whole year. This time, we want to have a piece of warm and fertile land under the sun." At the same time, the Rarans Kingdom, Florence Kingdom, and Saran Kingdom had received news of the orcs' invasion. These kingdoms had been paying attention to the orc tribes in the northern wastelands. When they saw the orc tribes moving southward, they immediately sent back the news. The invasion of the beast men at this time put a lot of pressure on the human kingdoms. There was still a month before the harvest, and the nobles were reluctant to burn their fields. Most of the farmlands outside the city belonged to the nobles, and they wanted them to burn their own fields. The stingy nobles wouldn't do that. As for the orc invasion, that was the army's problem. The orc invasion also made a few kingdoms nervous. The nobles near the northern border began to recruit soldiers. As for the refugees that had been promised to Su Lan, they were forced to join the army. In a short period of time, the number of soldiers in the northern nobles' hands increased by 2 to 3 times. However, even though the number of soldiers increased by 2 to 3 times, the strength of the army didn't increase. Instead, it decreased. These soldiers were basically farmers who had just put down their hoes and picked up their weapons. They could defend the city, but they would probably mutiny and run away as soon as they entered the battlefield. The Florentine kingdom, the Roran's kingdom, and the Saran kingdom all began to increase the number of troops in their respective fortresses. The Florentine kingdom's Blackstone city used to only have 5,000 troops stationed there, but after receiving the orcs' invasion, the number of troops increased to 30,000 in less than a week. Roland's Beast Blood Fortress and the Saran kingdom's Canyon Pass had also increased their troops. At the same time, the nobles of the northern lands had also issued a mobilization order. All sorts of military supplies were being collected. Many merchant convoys that were ready to depart were stopped. Then, some soldiers took the order and confiscated the goods of these merchants. These goods would be returned after the war ended. Of course, this was just an official statement. In fact, these goods would not be returned even after the war ended. In the end, they would only be compensated according to the lowest price of these goods. It wasn't that they wouldn't be compensated at all. In this era, those who could form merchant convoys had the backing of nobles. If there wasn't compensation, those nobles wouldn't give up. The human kingdoms in the north and the northern wastelands were separated by the Nafal mountain range. This Nafal mountain range stretched for thousands of miles. The main peak of the mountain range was covered in snow all year round. Many wild beasts and magical beasts lived there. Although this mountain range separated the humans from the northern wastelands, there were still many paths that could be passed through. The Blackstone Fortress, the Beast Blood Fortress, and the Canyon Pass were the 3 largest paths through this mountain range. These canyons were much easier to traverse than the other paths through the mountains. There was no problem for large carts to pass through. Apart from these 3 canyons, the other paths were rugged, steep, and difficult to pass through. There were many places where carriages couldn't pass through. Some of the most dangerous paths were steep cliffs on one side and bottomless abyss on the other. There was only a rugged path that was less than half a meter wide. Most of these paths were used by smugglers and merchants. Not only were these paths difficult to traverse, they were also life-threatening. If they accidentally bumped into the magical beasts that lived there, they would lose both their lives and their wealth. The Beast Blood Fortress was the gate to the north of the Roran's kingdom. Once this place was breached, the 3 northern provinces of the Roran's kingdom would have to face the assault of the orcs. Ever since Count Colin had received news that the orcs were heading south, he had immediately started preparing for battle. There were only 3,000 soldiers stationed in the Beast Blood Fortress. Among them, there was an army of 500 knights. These knights were the backbone of the Beast Blood Fortress. 500 heavily armored knights were mounted on warhorses that were similarly armored. They were the strongest soldiers in the human kingdoms of this world. A knight, man, horse, and armor weighed up to 500 kilograms. When they charged, there was no need to talk about weapon damage. Just the impact alone was enough to rupture the internal organs of an adult orc. The 30,000 reinforcements from the kingdom had also arrived. However, this did not make Count Colin relax. According to the information from the front lines, the orcs could be said to have turned out in full force this time. They were facing an orc army of at least 100,000 men. Outside the Beast Blood Fortress, the various antlers and barricades from before had been completely destroyed. The ground was a mess, with corpses and bloodstains everywhere. The air was filled with the nauseating smell of blood. In the battle that had just ended, the orcs had not gained the slightest advantage. However, they had also successfully accomplished their battle objective. All the defensive facilities outside the fortress had been destroyed. The human soldiers guarding the fortress were still rather excited. Although the orc army seemed to be large, the fortress had taken advantage of the natural terrain. The orcs could not make use of their advantage in numbers at all. The narrow terrain meant that they could only put in a small number of soldiers to attack. The steep mountain walls on both sides of the fortress provided them with a natural side protection. Below the walls, a large number of corpses were piled up. The nauseating smell attracted a large number of vultures. Some scavenger crows were also cawing in the sky. Normal beasts were afraid of an army, but these birds did not have many scruples. When night fell and the battle ended, it was time for them to have a full meal. The orc army camp was only 10 miles away from the fortress. At this time, a large number of orc supervisors were using leather whips to drive the kobolds, goblins, and other slaves to cut down trees. Then the orc craftsmen would make simple siege weapons. Although the orc civilization could not be compared to that of the humans, their social system was much stronger than that of the gnolls, kobolds, and goblins. Just 3 days after the battle between the humans and orcs at the Beast Blood Fortress, the Blackstone Fortress and the Canyon Pass also broke out in battles. After a short period of probing, the orcs began a powerful attack. Sulen knew that the orcs would invade later. After all, the northern citadel was not on the path of the orcs. The closest battlefield to the Blackstone Fortress was only 300 miles away. To the north of the northern citadel was the Sierra de Lotus. If the orcs wanted to attack the northern citadel, they would have to go around the Sierra de Lotus and attack from the northwest. After knowing that the orcs were attacking, Sulen immediately called back the army that was clearing out monsters and bandits in his territory. The northern citadel now had 7,000 soldiers. Most of them were spearmen. There were 4,000 of them, followed by 2,000 archers. Originally, Sulen wanted to form more archers. However, archers were not like spearmen. A wooden stick and a sharp spearhead were enough. The archers' bows needed good materials. Although the centaurs and gnolls had cultivated wood to make bows, the amount was limited. It was hard to form a 2,000 archers. Most of them were still using birch bows. The strongest among them were the gnolls. The strongest of them had already become a gnoll magic archer. They could add elemental effects to their arrows. Most of the gnolls were still at the gnoll archer level. As for the gnoll phantom archer, there was not a single gnoll archer. The main reason was that gnolls needed twice as much experience to level up as humans. But even so, the accuracy and range of the half-elf archers were much higher than that of human archers. Su Luan sent out all the scouts to keep an eye on the movements of the Beastman army. At this time, the Beastman army shouldn't know about Su Luan's city. Once they knew that there was a human city here, the Beastmen would definitely attack. At the same time, the construction of the wizard tower in the city did not stop. However, Sulen sent out a large number of people to start digging the moat. Before, only a small part of the moat was dug out. After the orcs were dealt with, there were no more enemies in the area. Therefore, the moat was stopped. Now, it was just a restart. Sullen's moat would directly lead the water from the Red Sand River. The moat was about 10 meters wide and 3 meters deep. The water in the moat was flowing. Sulen even had the underground spring ability to lead 2 springs from the ground, allowing the water to flow into the moat. Since the North City was located on higher ground, there was no need to worry about the water flowing into the city. The moat was not only for defense, but also for water transportation. Sulen planned to build a dock outside the city after the war. It would allow ships to transport goods from the Red Sand River to the city gate through the moat. The North City's moat was being built as fast as possible. The caravans in the city had also received news of the orcs' attack. These caravans could not return to the human kingdom before the war ended. They could only stay in the North City for the time being. The guards and mercenaries of these caravans were also called up. Sulen did not plan to send them to the battlefield. He wanted to prevent them from causing trouble. Chapter 251. Although these mercenaries and guards weren't as strong as the regular army, they were still much stronger than normal people. Sulan didn't want these mercenaries and guards to cause trouble in the city while he was fighting on the front lines. Su Luan had never overestimated the moral integrity of mercenaries and caravan guards. In this era, it was very dangerous to do business in the wilderness, especially in the northern wasteland. It was fine when they were in the city or within the city limits, because these people were like normal merchants. But in the wilderness, the law of the jungle prevailed. It was common for the merchant guards and mercenaries to rob other merchant caravans. These people were merchants when they entered the city, and bandits when they left. Unless they were caught directly, it was impossible to tell them apart. Sulan also had a lot of crazy things in the city, such as the secret recipe of white sugar, the brewing process of rum, paper making, and so on. Any one of these skills was worth tens of thousands of gold. As long as you learned one of these skills, you wouldn't have to worry about money for the rest of your life. It wasn't impossible for you to even get a noble title. These people wanted to steal these skills from the first day they came to the city. Last month, Chris caught more than a dozen people who wanted to steal these skills. On average, she caught one every 2 days. As for what happened to these people in the end, it wasn't bad. Alex told Sulan that the low-grade harpies wanted some materials. Sulan waved his hand and gave these people to Alex to live in the Eagle Stronghold. There were more than 3,000 harpies in the Eagle Stronghold. Apart from the harpies and their leader, the rest of the harpies couldn't break free from their instincts. Those who dared to steal skills in the northern wastelands were all strong. Many of them were knights. This was good news for the harpies. These people were fed by the harpies 24 hours a day. They didn't rest at all. They were working hard all the time. These people could be said to be enjoying the feeling of having 3,000 wives. Once the orcs attacked the northern wastelands, the Castellan's mansion would definitely withdraw their men. At that time, the defense would naturally be a bit lax. Sulan didn't think these merchants would let go of such a good opportunity to resist the orcs. They would definitely take advantage of it. Sulan never overestimated human nature. The cheapest and most precious thing in the world was human nature. It was also the most vulnerable thing in the world. Blackstone Stronghold. The battle had already been going on for 3 days. The orc army had sent out a large number of servants to fight. They used these servants to consume the rolling stones and arrows of the humans. The high-intensity battle had consumed a lot of the Blackstone Fort's resources. The Blackstone Fort was a military stronghold and its walls were repaired quite well. The orc army didn't have any advantage. On the 4th day of the war, the Blackstone Stronghold. The city walls. The siege tower was a simple building made of wood. The orc soldiers could enter from the bottom of the siege tower and climb up the stairs. Along the way, they were protected by wooden planks, so they wouldn't be attacked by the enemy. At the top of the stairs was the exit of the siege tower. This exit was at the same height as the city walls. After walking out, one could immediately step onto the city walls and engage in close combat with the enemy. The Blackstone Stronghold was crudely made, but its effect was not bad. The Blackstone Stronghold was built by the Blackstone Stronghold. Although the Blackstone Stronghold was a great tool, its weakness was also obvious. It was slow. The Blackstone Stronghold was built by the Blackstone Stronghold. It was rough and heavy. If it was a normal human, it would be difficult to push the Blackstone Stronghold forward. However, it was just right for the Blackstone Stronghold. Other than the Blackstone Stronghold, the Blackstone Stronghold had also prepared some ladders and battering rams. The Blackstone Stronghold was pushed by the Blackstone Stronghold. The soldiers and generals of the Blackstone Stronghold looked serious. When they saw the Blackstone Stronghold approaching, they ordered the Blackstone Stronghold's archers to shoot fire arrows. The fire arrows were a threat to the Blackstone Stronghold. After being smeared with kerosene, the Blackstone Stronghold's fire arrows were quite good. The Blackstone Stronghold didn't have many fire protection measures. After the arrows hit the Blackstone Stronghold, the kerosene stuck to the wooden planks and ignited them. The Blackstone Stronghold didn't give up and continued to push forward. At the same time, the Blackstone Stronghold's archers on the Blackstone Stronghold began to shoot. The archers on both sides began to fight, and both sides suffered heavy casualties. Under the cover of the archers, the Blackstone Stronghold quickly approached the Blackstone Stronghold. The fastest battering rams were about to reach the Blackstone Stronghold. Suddenly, a fireball the size of a washbasin flew out from the Blackstone Stronghold. The fireball dragged a long tail behind it as it flew towards the battering rams. Boom! An explosion sounded. The battering rams and the dozen or so Blackstone Stronghold soldiers were instantly engulfed in flames. The wooden battering rams were blown to pieces under the force of the explosion. The dozen or so Blackstone Stronghold soldiers were also set ablaze. Wizards! Wizards! We have wizards! The soldiers on the Blackstone Stronghold cheered. The morale of the Blackstone Stronghold skyrocketed. On the Blackstone Stronghold wall, a middle-aged man in a red robe waved his magic staff. Soon, another fireball flew out. This time, the fireball flew directly towards a tall Blackstone Stronghold. The 20-meter-tall Blackstone Stronghold couldn't dodge at all. It was instantly hit by the fireball. This Blackstone Stronghold that didn't burn down after taking so many arrows exploded. The Blackstone Stronghold archers on the Blackstone Stronghold were blown away. The tall Blackstone Stronghold was split in half. Many Blackstone Stronghold soldiers below were directly hit by the burning wood. The Blackstone Stronghold was instantly engulfed in flames. The Blackstone Stronghold soldiers that didn't make it out were burned alive. This wizard cast a few fireballs to destroy most of the Blackstone Stronghold siege weapons. He was only an intermediate wizard. There were only a few wizards in the Blackstone Stronghold. The wizards wouldn't use up all their mana. What they did just now was to boost the morale of the Blackstone Stronghold. Even though most of the siege towers had been destroyed, the orcs quickly pushed out new siege machines. This time, the adepts did not continue to attack. Instead, the ballistae on the walls were drawn, and the sound of bowstrings being drawn rang out. A soldier placed a long spear on one of the ballistae and ignited it with kerosene. Bang! With a buzzing sound, the 3-meter-long spear flew out and pierced through an orc. It then fiercely nailed itself onto the siege chariot. The heavy siege chariot shook back and forth a few times. The flames on the spear ignited the siege chariot. Bang! 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 The sound of bowstrings rang out on the Blackstone Stronghold wall. Spears flew out one after another, leaving a trail of corpses in their wake. The Blackstone Stronghold soldiers that were directly hit had a bowl-sized bloody hole in their bodies. Some of the Blackstone Stronghold soldiers that were too close were directly pierced through. However, the accuracy of the ballistae was limited. Their firing speed was also slow. Many of the siege weapons still managed to get close to the Blackstone Stronghold wall. Seeing this, the general of the Blackstone Stronghold immediately gave the order to counterattack. 500 knights quietly lined up behind the Blackstone Stronghold gate. These knights all wore metal armor and held sharp swords in their hands. The 500 knights quietly stood behind the gate, waiting for the gate to open. An impassioned horn sounded. The gate of the Blackstone Stronghold slowly opened. The knights who were already prepared immediately charged. The 500 knights instantly moved. The sound of hooves thundered on the battlefield. The fully armored knights instantly rushed out of the Blackstone Stronghold gate and directly charged towards the orc stronghold siege weapons. The orcs never thought that the humans would actually open the gate and attack. The Blackstone stronghold was immediately scattered by the human knights. The infantry was completely massacred by the charging heavy cavalry. Even the orcs were the same. Wherever the knights went, the orcs were cut down like grass. In just 2 charges, the orc stronghold's vanguard was scattered. Seeing the orc stronghold soldiers fleeing in panic, the knights did not continue to pursue. Instead, they ignited the kerosene that they carried with them and threw it on the siege weapons. Dozens of siege weapons were quickly ignited. After these siege weapons were ignited, a deep horn sounded. All the knights turned their horses around and returned to the Blackstone stronghold. After the last knight entered, the gate closed again. The battle was still not over. The orcs did not choose to retreat after losing a large number of siege weapons. Instead, they sent another 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers to attack the Blackstone stronghold with ladders. The general of the Blackstone stronghold, Count Louis, had a heavy expression on his face. These damned orcs want to take us down in one go? Aren't they afraid of breaking their teeth? The archers madly pulled their bowstrings. Many of their arms were sore from pulling the bowstrings for so long. Many archers even had their fingers cut by the bowstrings. A rain of arrows fell from the sky, but the orcs were not afraid at all. The orc stronghold soldiers raised crude wooden shields. Many of the wooden shields were not even stripped of their bark. They forcefully endured the rain of arrows and continued to attack the Blackstone stronghold. A large number of orcs charged without caring about casualties. Soon, a ladder was placed on the Blackstone stronghold's wall. The orc stronghold at the back sped up and quickly climbed up the wall. They then stabbed down with their spears. A few orc stronghold soldiers cut off the hooks of the ladder and pushed it down. 2 orc stronghold soldiers who were halfway up the ladder fell from the sky. A tall orc stronghold jumped up the Blackstone stronghold's wall after a few jumps. He swung his giant axe and chopped the orc stronghold soldiers in half along with their weapons. He then defended the Blackstone stronghold's wall and allowed more orcs to climb up. Soon, 5 orcs came up. These orcs were under the lead of the orc stronghold's leader. The human soldiers around them were forced to retreat. Seeing this situation, a few knights immediately rushed up with their men. Chapter 252. Blood and flesh splattered all over the battlefield. A large number of soldiers were dying every second. The orc warrior that rushed up was also killed by a few human soldiers. Finally, after more than 2 hours of fierce battle, the orcs retreated, leaving more than 2,000 dead bodies behind. The soldiers of the Blackstone fortress finally let out a sigh of relief. They were all exhausted after a whole day of fighting. Gavin stretched his sore shoulders while the guards next to him bandaged his wounds. The soldiers who came to relieve the soldiers who had just fought took the place of Gavin. After resting for a while, Gavin walked down the wall with his servants and headed back to the castle. I've heard about Sir Gavin's fighting style when I was in Cult City. I thought it was just an exaggeration, but after seeing it today, Sir Gavin is even braver than the rumors say. Count Wayne exclaimed. He personally understood the situation on the battlefield today. The ferocity of the orcs shocked him. Most of the captains on the wall began to ask for reinforcements in the middle of the battle. Gavin was the only one who led his men and did not retreat. He didn't ask for reinforcements even once. At the same time, his soldiers suffered the least casualties, but they achieved the greatest results. They killed more than 500 orc soldiers in the section of the wall they defended, including several orc warriors. Sir Wayne, thank you for the compliment. Gavin forced a smile and said, You've seen the difference between us and the orc army today. Without the protection of the wall, we are no match for the orcs. More importantly, according to our intelligence, there are at least 100,000 orcs this time. We only have less than 50,000 soldiers. It will be very difficult for us to defend the city with our strength. That's why I beg you to ask for reinforcements from the king immediately. Also, we have lost 4,000 men today, and the orcs have lost 3,000 men. We can't win in a war of attrition. Sir Gavin, I will ask for reinforcements from His Majesty, Count Wayne agreed after some consideration. But Gavin, you know that even if His Majesty agrees to send reinforcements, it will take at least a month for them to arrive. We can only rely on ourselves for this month. Do you have any ideas? Sir, we can only hold on. After a moment of silence, Gavin said, let's ask the surrounding nobles for help first. They have quite a number of soldiers. Although they aren't elites, they should have no problem defending the city. Do you think those nobles will be willing to send their troops here? Count Wayne sneered. As a noble, he understood the intentions of those nobles. Even if the Blackstone fort was in danger, those nobles wouldn't agree to send their private soldiers here. Sometimes, even if they knew that danger was approaching, as long as it wasn't right in front of them, these nobles wouldn't care. You could say that they were short-sighted and didn't see the big picture. In fact, most nobles were like that. They had their own castles and their own soldiers. Most of the time, they believed in themselves more. Even if we don't hire a private army, we can still hire new soldiers. We need a lot of manpower. They won't know how to use weapons, but they can at least carry rocks and boil water. As long as they are still healthy, we can just ask them to throw rocks into the water. Gavin said. Gavin, if you do that, the soldiers might suffer heavy casualties in the end. Wayne's heart skipped a beat, and he said with difficulty. Those untrained soldiers might sound nice, but they were actually farmers. The farmers had less than a 10% chance of surviving on the battlefield. Do you have a better idea, sir? Gavin asked. Wayne opened his mouth. He didn't have a better idea either. Let's do it then. Wayne quickly recovered. He clenched his teeth and nodded in agreement. For the sake of the Blackstone Fort, these sacrifices are worth it. By the way, I heard there's a human city in the wasteland, right? Wayne suddenly thought of something. Gavin nodded and said, you're talking about Northtown City, right? That human city was built by a young noble who bought the land expansion order last year. It's a place rich in sugar and rum. How strong are they? Wayne asked, his eyes glowing. Gavin hesitated for a moment and said, they're quite strong. I heard from the merchants who went there that they defeated goblins, kobolds, gnolls, and even the orcs. But I've never been there myself, so I think it's a bit exaggerated. How could they possibly defeat the orcs when it was just built a year ago? I think the lord of the settlement was just boasting. That being said, they should be quite strong since they were able to hold their ground in the wasteland for more than a year. That's great. Wayne's eyes glowed when he heard the word strong. He immediately filtered out the first half of his sentence, if that's the case, let's ask the lord of the settlement for help. Didn't he want a territory and become a noble? If he helps us defeat the orcs, I'll recommend him to the king. Not only will he be given a title, he'll even be given a land. Alright, I'll send someone to contact Northtown City, Gavin shrugged and agreed. In his opinion, even if Northtown City agreed to help, the army they sent out would not be very strong. As for Duke Wayne's promise, it was fine to just listen to him. Nobles had always been like this. If Northtown City dared to take the initiative to attack, Gavin believed that the lord of the settlement would not be able to wait until the end of the war. Once the lord of the settlement attacked, he would not even be able to withstand the first wave of attacks from the orcs. Under the cover of the night, Gavin picked a few knights and quietly left the fortress. They then moved northeast. The orcs did not block the fortress. After all, there were mountains on both sides of the fortress. It was impossible to surround it. The orcs' camp was not close to the fortress. They also had to prevent the human knights from ambushing them during the night. The next day, the orcs began to move out again as soon as the sun rose. This time, the orcs pushed the siege weapons that they had built overnight to attack the fortress. However, the number of siege weapons was reduced by half compared to the previous day. However, the battle today was even more intense than the previous day. This time, the orcs sent out even more soldiers to attack the fortress. They did not have enough siege towers and siege chariots, so they used ladders instead. These orcs did not care about casualties at all. Since the morning, more orcs had been climbing up the fortress walls. These damned orcs, are they crazy? Gavin said as he wiped the blood off his face after killing the last orc on the wall with a single slash. At this rate, we won't be able to last more than 30 days. The orcs are panicking. Duke Wayne looked at the orcs that had temporarily retreated. The other orc army in the distance was already ready. They don't care about casualties, and they're taking turns to attack us. This method is putting a lot of pressure on us, but the orcs are not having it easy either. Why do you think these orcs are so desperate? Why? Gavin looked at the orcs in the distance and sat down on the ground. I think it's because of food. Food? You mean the orcs are running out of food? Gavin's eyes lit up. Wayne nodded and continued, I've been observing for the past few days. There's very little cooking smoke in the orcs' camp. It's far from enough to feed so many orcs. Then we just have to hold on for a few days, and the orcs will retreat when they run out of food. Gavin stood up excitedly. It's not that simple. Wayne shook his head and said, even if the orcs are running out of food, the pressure on us will be even greater. Without food, the orcs will go even crazier. They will desperately try to take down this place. There are huge amounts of food waiting to be harvested behind the Blackstone Fortress. The orcs will definitely attack us with all their might after they run out of food. That's why we're under even more pressure than before. Duke Wayne said with a serious face. The closer they are to death, the crazier they will be. After the craziness comes silence, and the darkest moment comes before dawn. The northern citadel was actively preparing for war. Sulen was also very concerned about the orcs' attack. Even the northern citadel had to be careful when dealing with an army of over 100,000 orcs. The eagle's nest had also sent out many harpies to investigate. Every movement of the orcs was recorded and reported to Sulen. Sheriff Harris was very busy during this period of time. He sent out all 300 security guards to patrol the city 24 hours a day to prevent people from taking advantage of the opportunity to cause trouble. The 2,000 militia were also reorganized. These militia did not need to go to the battlefield. They just followed the security guards to maintain the stability of Northtown City. The army of the northern citadel had also been recalled. They would move out as soon as Sulen gave the order. Lord's Castle. Sulen tidied up a room and turned it into a war room. Other than those who had missions, the rest of the generals and heroes were all there. There was a giant sand table in the middle of the room. The sand table vividly marked out the locations of the Blackstone Citadel, the Orc Army, and the Northern Citadel. Who do you think will win in the end? Sulen asked the generals. I don't know. Boulder and Johnson looked at the sand table and then at Sulen. They looked like they didn't know anything. Sulen was not surprised by their reaction. He was already used to it. Kane looked at the sand table for a while and said, I think the orcs will win. Based on the previous reports, the Blackstone Citadel doesn't have many defenders. According to the orc strategy, the Blackstone Citadel won't be able to hold on. What about you? Sulen looked at Karina, Grace, and the others. I think the humans will win. After all, the orcs don't have much food. Chapter 253. According to our information, the orcs didn't bring much supplies. They will soon run out of food. Once they run out of food, it won't matter even if they double their numbers. Karina thought for a moment and said. I think, "Sir, there's an emergency." At this moment, a guard hurried over and said. Su Len stood up and walked out of the combat readiness hall. "What happened?" "Sir, there was a messenger from the Blackstone Fortress. He said he was here on Earl Wayne's orders." The guard said respectfully. "Earl Wayne of the Blackstone Fortress? Why did he send someone here? Don't tell me he wants me to send out troops." Su Len muttered to himself, then said to the guard, "Bring the messenger to the living room. I'll be there right away." "Yes, sir." Su Len went back to the combat readiness hall and gave some simple instructions. Then he walked to the living room. "You are Earl Wayne's messenger?" Su Len looked at the travel-worn knight in front of him and said. "Yes, sir." After the knight saw Su Len, he quickly said, "Sir, the Blackstone Fortress is in danger. Earl Wayne wants you to send out troops to help us defeat the orcs. This is a letter from Earl Wayne himself." The guard next to him took the bamboo tube and checked it. Then he handed it to Su Len. Su Len took it and looked at it. There was a noble's badge on the wind outlet of the bamboo tube. The seal was not broken. He then opened the seal and took out a piece of parchment to read. The content of the letter was not out of Su Len's expectation. It was nothing more than asking Su Len to send out troops to help them fight the orcs. At the same time, as long as Su Len sent out troops, he would promise to help him get a title and a land after the battle. The land would not be in the northern wilderness, but in the hinterland of the Kingdom of Florence. At the same time, he also threatened that if Su Len refused, he would not pass the test and would tell the orcs about what happened in Northern Town City. Su Len sneered in his heart. He didn't believe a single word of the promise. The note didn't say that it would help Su Len obtain these things. It only said that it would report to the king. It didn't matter whether the king agreed or not. At that time, he could use this as an excuse to brush him off. However, Su Len was not interested in these promises. It was not easy for him to develop such a good situation in the northern wilderness. He would not return to the Kingdom of Florence to be the village chief. That's right, the village chief. According to the current level of rewards in the Kingdom of Florence, Su Len would at most be a baron, and then a few villages would be divided into his territory. Take the emissary to rest first. We will consider sending troops to help the Blackstone stronghold. We need to discuss this matter. Su Len pondered in his heart, neither refusing nor agreeing. Sir, the Blackstone stronghold really needs your help. The emissary said eagerly when he heard Su Len wanted to discuss. You go and rest first. We will give you an answer as soon as possible. Su Len waved his hand and signaled the guards to take him away. Seeing that Su Len ignored him, the emissary had no choice but to leave with the guards unwillingly. Su Len was not too worried about this war between the humans and the orcs. He was thinking about how to get the most out of this war. In his opinion, the best result was that both the humans and the orcs suffered heavy losses. However, this situation was very difficult to happen. According to the information he received, the orcs were now putting all their eggs in one basket. On the other hand, the humans were not prepared. Although the Blackstone stronghold temporarily blocked the orcs' attack, this stalemate would not last long. According to the information obtained by the Harpies and the Scouts, the orcs did not have much supplies at all. They had to attack the Blackstone stronghold before they ran out of food, and the human reinforcements would take at least a month. Su Len knew how sturdy the Blackstone stronghold was. He had entered the wasteland from the Blackstone stronghold in the past. The Blackstone stronghold was built in the Blackstone Canyon. This canyon was called the Blackstone Canyon because the rocks were black. The walls of the stronghold were 20 meters tall and there were cliffs on both sides. The mouth of the canyon was shaped like a trumpet. The stronghold was built at the mouth of the trumpet. It could be said that it was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Even if Su Len was the one to attack, it would be very difficult to take down this place without him personally. However, he did not know why he had a strange feeling that the orcs would definitely have a way to break through the Blackstone stronghold. Sulan did not know why he was so sure. He did not want to see the orcs win. Once the orcs broke through the Blackstone stronghold, the northern provinces behind the Blackstone stronghold would be plundered. Sulan did not care about this. He only cared about the large amount of food the orcs would obtain. One had to know that the orcs had always been in a state of food shortage in the northern wastelands. If the orcs obtained a sufficient supply of food, they would definitely keep on fighting. When that time came, Northgard City would definitely not be spared. Moreover, the outbreak of war would greatly affect Northgard City's trade. Almost all of the trade routes had been cut off. The migration of refugees was also forced to stop. If Northgard City wanted to rely on natural production to increase the population, it would take at least a dozen years. Sulan did not have that much time to waste. After sending the messenger away, Sulan returned to the war preparation hall and ordered all the warriors to prepare for battle. He did not plan to attack the orcs directly. Instead, he planned to hide on the side and secretly reap some benefits. The next day, Sulan led the army out of Northgard City. He left Hathaway and Chris in the city. He also left 1,000 spearmen and archers behind. He then led the rest of the army and left with the Harpies. The orc army was over 300 kilometers away from Northgard City. It took the city's army 3 days to reach a forest 10 kilometers away from the battlefield. Blackstone Stronghold had become a meat grinder, Both the orcs and humans were bleeding here. The ground was covered in blood. The entire valley was filled with a nauseating stench. Some of the corpses that could not be dealt with in time had already begun to rot. The vultures in the sky circled back and forth. After a week of continuous high-intensity battles, the human defenders of the stronghold were exhausted. However, their expressions were still stable because reinforcements had arrived. Although the reinforcements were only a group of farmers who had put their heads down, more would come. As long as there were enough reinforcements, the human defenders believed that no matter how many orcs came, they would all retreat with their tails between their legs. This battle had lasted for a week. Although the human defenders had suffered heavy losses, the orcs had also suffered heavy casualties. Just the corpses piled up outside the stronghold were already 1 or 2 meters tall. Standing on the walls and looking down, it looked like a slaughterhouse. However, they were not slaughtering livestock, but humans and orcs. "General, you're injured." A guard came to Wayne's side. He quickly took out some medicine and bandages when he saw the blood seeping out of Wayne's arm. "It's nothing, just a small wound. You guys can go and rest." As the highest-ranking officer of Blackstone Stronghold, Wayne was very qualified. As a noble, he was obviously different from the other noble generals. He was more popular among the soldiers. The wind in Blackstone Canyon was very strong. A strong wind blew from the north of the canyon, and the strong stench made Wayne frown. The messenger didn't come back. The Lord of Northgard City didn't come. As expected. "Go back and rest. I'll stay here and watch." Gavin shook his head. His body was covered in blood. There were many dents on his tough armor. It looked very tattered. "All right." Wayne got up and went back to rest. As the commander, he had to make sure he was full of energy. The night wind whistled. 5 kilometers away from Blackstone Canyon, the orcs were not resting. In the largest camp, the orc priests were feeding some strange creatures. These creatures had a pair of fleshy wings and dark green skin. They had the head of a dragon, but they looked very ugly. Their necks were a bit short, but their bodies were very strong. Their hind legs were very powerful. If Sulan was here, he would immediately recognize them. They were a type of Euron called wyverns. Wyverns were not very powerful among the flying Euron. They were about 3 meters long and had a wingspan of 5 meters. They didn't have dragon breath, but they could spray poison. The poison of a wyvern was very deadly. At this moment, a dozen wyverns were quietly squatting on the ground. The orcs beside them kept feeding them. Soon, all the wyverns were fed. A shaman walked over. That old shaman grabbed a handful of powder from a shabby pocket and muttered some cryptic words. Soon, elemental energy started converging and the old shaman scattered the powder in his hand into the sky. A red spirit light shrouded all of the wyverns. Soon, the wyverns couldn't help but roar. Their bodies were clearly stronger than before. After seeing this effect, the old shaman sighed in relief. Let's start. With an order, a dozen beast men climbed onto the wyverns' backs with weapons. Each wyvern carried 2 beast men. The wyverns were flapping their wings, clearly very strenuous. At this time, the shaman once again cast a spell. Wind elements converged and buffed the wyverns. Flight. After buffed by flight, the dozen wyverns carried 30 beast men and flew into the sky. There was no light in the sky, and thick black clouds covered all the starlight. The dozen wyverns merged into the darkness, and after identifying the direction, they directly flew towards the Blackstone fort. The wyverns were very fast. In order to prevent humans from hearing the flapping of their wings, all the wyverns flew a kilometer in the air. With the help of the bonfires on the ground, the wyverns carried the beast men over the Blackstone fort. Chapter 254. On the other side of the Blackstone Canyon. About 2 kilometers away from the Blackstone Fort, in a mountain kernel. The rocks in the col had already been cleaned up, and the biting cold mountain wind was blowing, letting out endless whistling sounds. There were 3 bonfires lit in the open space, and several dozen sturdy beast men were scattered around the bonfires. These beast men were silently sitting on the ground, chewing some food in their mouths and looking up at the sky from time to time. Suddenly, the sound of wings flapping could be heard in the dark sky, followed by a gust of wind. The bonfires in the surroundings flickered, and a few life forms with bodies over 3 meters and a wingspan of 5 meters descended from the sky. Their sinister and ugly faces could be clearly seen in the light of the bonfires. They were wyverns. A few beast men dismounted from the wyverns, and these wyverns once again took to the sky and flew towards the beastmen's camp. The other beast men nodded at these beast men who had just arrived, and the simple camp quickly regained its silence. These beast men had entered the Nafir mountain range when the beast men had started attacking the Blackstone fort. These beast men had gone through untold hardships in the mountains, and after suffering disastrous casualties, they had finally crossed the Nafir mountain range. Among them, there were those who had died in the mouths of various magic beasts, those who had mistakenly entered a dangerous place, and those who had fallen into a bottomless abyss. However, they had also successfully completed their mission. Behind the Blackstone fort, they had found a hidden valley and set up a simple camp there. After the wyverns returned to the beastmen tribe, they once again took off with 30 beastmen warriors on their backs. The beastmen shamans once again blessed them with flight, and the wyverns once again flew towards the back of the Blackstone fort. The wyverns continuously transported the beastmen to the back of the fort. Although they could only transport 30 beastmen at a time, many a little made an ocean. The leading beastman warrior looked up at the night sky. It was pitch black without any light. This kind of weather was the best camouflage for the wyverns. For this plan, the tribe had already taken out all the wyverns they had tamed over the years and blessed them with spells, making them undertake the transportation. According to the plan, they could transport about 500 beastmen warriors before tonight's operation. More than 500 elite orc warriors might not be very useful on a large-scale battlefield, but they were perfect as a suicide squad for sneak attacks. Just you wait, humans. The orc army will soon return to that fertile land. Back then, with the help of the elves and dwarves, those thin and weak humans took the land from our hands. Now, we will take back all the land that our ancestors left for us. The Beastman leader drank a mouthful of wine and then passed the wineskin to the other Beastman warriors. The night wind whistled as a few pieces of firewood were added to the bonfire. The Beastmen quietly waited for the wyverns to send more soldiers over. The orcs were born with night vision. Although they were less than 10 meters away, they could see their surroundings clearly with the help of the weak bonfire. Hundreds of orcs could be seen faintly in the darkness of the night. These orcs were silently chewing dry rations. These dry rations were coarse and hard to swallow. They were the unique cold wheat of the north and were one of the few foods the tribe had. For tonight's battle, the orc tribe could be said to be going all out. In fact, since last winter, the orcs had been short on food. They had endured the cold winter with great difficulty, but the appearance of this year's elemental tide had caused a large number of beasts to mutate. The original magic beasts had also become very active, making the already difficult lives of the orcs even more difficult. Rome didn't know what the elemental tide meant, but he knew that the white dragon activity on the ice field had become more frequent. In order to survive, they had to migrate south. As one of the higher-ups of the orc tribe, he clearly knew how important this war was to their tribe. And as the key to victory, tonight's surprise attack would play a decisive role. They couldn't fail. They couldn't fail even once. The orcs' lives were very difficult after losing their fertile land. Without enough food, many of their clansmen would freeze to death every winter. Every snowfall was a test of life and death. Cold and hunger had accompanied Rome since the moment he was born. This time, he wanted his clansmen to no longer have to endure hunger and cold. At this time, the human kingdom was about to have a harvest. As long as they broke through the Blackstone fortress, there would be a bountiful harvest everywhere. Countless grains would be waiting for them to harvest. Looking at the time tool given to him by the great shaman, it was already 2:30 in the morning. Calculating the time, the last batch of orcs should have arrived. According to the plan, they would attack at 3 in the morning, one from the front and one from the back. The Blackstone fortress was built to defend against the orcs. Although it had 2 walls, the southern wall wasn't very high. After all, behind it was human territory. Soon, the sound of wings flapping could be heard. The last batch of orc warriors had arrived. There were already close to 600 elite orc warriors in the small call in front of them. The orc officer's scarlet eyes looked around. Then, he picked up his weapon and walked out of the colonel. Close to 600 elite orc warriors followed behind him silently. Gavin didn't sleep well at night. He kept feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint the problem. This made him a little frustrated. The battle during the day had exhausted his body. In order to prepare for tomorrow's battle, he had to ensure that he had enough sleep. Although he had some doubts, Gavin still forced himself to sleep. Although wearing armor wasn't very comfortable, he had long gotten used to it. Just as he was sleeping soundly, a series of alarm bells rang. Gavin immediately got up and rushed out with the guards who were also awakened. As soon as he arrived outside, the entire fortress was filled with battle cries. In the darkness of the night, there were flickering lights. It was impossible to see how many enemies there were. Seeing this, Gavin made a prompt decision to gather his soldiers. Soldiers of the Thorn's army, listen up. I am Gavin. All soldiers of the Thorn's army, return to your positions immediately. Gavin yelled. Soon, many soldiers gathered around him. Everyone, don't panic. Light the torches. There aren't many enemies. The fortress hasn't been breached. These orcs are a small group that came from the Naphel mountain range. Gavin's personal guards kept yelling, and more soldiers stopped running around like headless flies. However, his actions were too conspicuous in the midst of the chaos. The orcs had also noticed Gavin's presence when nearly 1,000 orcs had gathered around him. Boss, there's a big fish over there. It looks like the commander of the humans. We can't let him continue gathering his troops. An orc pointed at Gavin, who was shouting in the distance. Call your men and follow me. I want to kill that human. Ram's eyes flashed fiercely. As he spoke, he led dozens of orc soldiers and charged towards the group of humans. Although Gavin had gathered his soldiers, their formation was already disrupted. They couldn't get into formation in this environment. These humans were already no match for the orcs. Without a formation, their morale plummeted. There was no way they could stop these orcs, who were like wolves and tigers. Not to mention, these orcs were all elites of the orc tribe. As soon as the two sides clashed, the human soldiers suffered heavy casualties. The orcs who had just gathered together were instantly stunned. Seeing this, the orcs attacked even more fiercely. Wherever they went, the orcs would scatter like birds and beasts. Gavin was furious when he saw the orcs charging at him. He raised his weapon and was about to charge forward, but the guards beside him quickly grabbed him and dragged him away. Just as the Blackstone fortress fell into chaos, the orc army that had been waiting for a long time bared their fangs at this moment. Siege chariots and siege towers were pushed onto the battlefield. The orc shamans buffed these orc soldiers with all kinds of spells. The human defenders who were attacked from both sides kept shooting arrows at the orcs. However, the chaos in the fortress made it impossible for the orcs to gather their forces. The number of arrows fired was sparse. It couldn't be compared to the number during the day. On the other hand, the orc siege weapons were more than twice the number during the day. It turned out that the orcs had already made enough siege weapons. However, they only used a small portion of them every day in order to numb the humans. Now that it was a critical moment, they directly sent out all of their siege weapons. Wayne, who had just arrived at the top of the fortress wall with his guards, felt a chill down his spine when he saw the orc army attacking the fortress. Damn the orcs, they have been saving their strength all this time. Wayne said with his teeth clenched. In the eyes of the humans, the orcs were all muscular and simple-minded creatures. However, as the commander of the army, he was being played by the orcs who he had always looked down on. How could he not be angry? However, even if he knew, there was nothing he could do now. Large amounts of siege weapons were being pushed towards the fortress wall by the orcs. The human defenders were in a panic. Sir, the Blackstone fortress is about to fall. We have to retreat. A few red-robed wizards said after looking at the situation on the battlefield. No, we can't retreat. The Blackstone fortress is the barrier of the northern provinces. Once it falls, the orcs will no longer be able to stop them. Wayne said angrily. There's no other way now. Look at the soldiers around you. They have lost their courage. The wizard sighed and pointed at the human soldiers on the fortress wall. The soldiers on the fortress wall had already begun to sneak away. Wayne silently put down the weapon in his hand. As the commander of the army, he could see that the soldiers no longer had the will to fight. The fortress was about to fall tonight, but he was not willing to give up. The night wind whistled, bringing with it a trace of coldness. Gather, we are retreating. Wayne painfully closed his eyes and gave the order to retreat. Chapter 255. Silver-Winged Knights. Charge! The Silver-Winged Knights, the strongest troop in the Blackstone Fortress, quickly gathered and charged south under Wayne's lead. The orcs who were causing chaos in the fortress had already split into small groups. Their goal was not to kill but to create chaos. As long as they saw human soldiers gathering, they would rush up and kill them. Some beast men saw a large number of knights gathered here and wanted to rush over. But before they could do anything, the knights had already charged. Once the 500 knights charged, these beastmen were like mantises trying to stop a chariot. A dozen elite beastman warriors didn't even make a splash before they were completely submerged under the hooves of the knights. Behind the silver-winged knights, there were many other knights and scattered soldiers retreating. With the knights opening a path, the orcs in the fortress could not resist at all. Soon, the silver-winged knights rushed out of the fortress. Seeing that the Blackstone fort was engulfed in a sea of flames, Wayne called for one of his personal guards and said solemnly, "Give him the fastest horse. Go to Cult City now. Tell Lord Eric that the Blackstone fortress has fallen. Tell him to prepare as soon as possible. Go now. Quick. The few of you, escort him." Once Blackstone fort was breached, the northern provinces would be the first to bear the brunt of the attack. The only city that could resist the orc army was Cult. Once Cult was lost, the orc army would be able to march straight in. When Sulan received the news, it was already 5 in the morning. He was sleeping soundly with Alex in his arms when he was woken up by a few harpies. When he heard that the Blackstone fortress had changed hands overnight, he was also shocked. Are those humans good-for-nothings? Suluan couldn't help but complain. Originally, he wanted to take advantage of the internecine battle between the orc army and the human army. But he didn't expect that the human army was so disappointing that the orc army was easily breached by the orc army. How did the orcs break into the Blackstone fortress? Sulan asked. The orcs sent out their elite troops. They crossed the Nephil Mountains and launched a sneak attack at night. The Blackstone fortress was in chaos. The orc army outside the fortress took the opportunity to attack the city. The humans were unable to resist, so they could only abandon the city and flee, the harpy replied. Over the Nephil Mountains? Suluan stroked his chin and said, "It seems that there are also some ruthless people among the beastmen. But even if it's a small army, it won't be easy to cross the Nephil mountain range. Their numbers won't be too many, but if they want to disturb the Blackstone fort, they won't be able to do it without at least 500 or 600 people. The orcs must have used other methods. When you were scouting, did you find anything unusual in the orc camp?" "By the way, we discovered some wyverns in the orc camp," the harpy said. Suluan nodded. "Wyvern. The orcs actually tamed this kind of wyvern. No wonder their sneak attack went so smoothly. Tell our people to be careful. Don't be discovered by the orc scouts. Also, pay attention to those wyverns." Although wyverns weren't outstanding among the flying Eurones, their strength was at grade 3 and they had deadly venom. They were a very troublesome type of Euron. However, the Air Force was still the Air Force. "What's the situation with the orcs now?" Sulan asked. "The orc army is passing through the Blackstone Canyon. A portion of the orcs have started to rush into the northern provinces. Looks like the Kingdom of Florence is in big trouble this time. The Blackstone fortress has been breached. Without this barrier, the northern provinces will be plunged into chaos. Moreover, the food will be ripe in a week. Now is the perfect time to supply those orcs. Once there is enough food, these orcs will be difficult to deal with." Just as Sulan was hiding, the orc army began to advance into the human hinterland. The first to suffer was Wintersun City. They didn't receive any news that the Blackstone fortress had been breached. Then, at dawn, they saw the orc army. Apart from a portion of the orc army guarding the city, the rest were seizing the time to harvest the food. Although the food would be ripe in a week, the orcs couldn't wait any longer. Seeing the orc army outside the city, the mayor of Wintersun City didn't have the courage to go out and fight. He closed the city gates and recruited soldiers to defend. The orc army didn't care about Wintersun City's actions. Wintersun City wasn't as sturdy as the Blackstone fortress. The most important thing now was to harvest the food. After harvesting the food, they would attack Wintersun City. There were only 1,000 soldiers in Wintersun City, and their strength was average. There were 7,000 temporary soldiers, but none of them had ever been on the battlefield. As for wizards, there was not a single one. The city wall was only 6 or 7 meters high, which was far from the Blackstone fortress. Faced with this situation, the shamans in the orc army also made their move. Bolts of lightning and flames were released, and this small city with a population of only 20 to 30,000 was breached by the orcs in less than a morning. The orc army didn't stop. Instead, they went south. The rest of the prepared city started scorching the walls and clearing the fields. However, the orcs came too quickly. Most of the time, the orcs didn't even harvest half of the food. They could only burn it. Even so, large amounts of food were still robbed by the orcs. The entire northern region was filled with humans and orcs killing each other. The orcs kept attacking, and the humans started to resist. In order to completely defeat the humans, the orc army didn't stay in other cities for long. After robbing the food, they saw that the cities were ready. They didn't want to give the humans a chance to rest, so they only left a small number of soldiers to guard the cities. A large group of orcs charged towards Cult City. As the most important city in the northern region, Cult City had been the frontline against the orcs 200 years ago. Until the Kingdom of Florence defeated the orcs in a war and drove them further north. Then, they built the Blackstone Fortress. From that day on, Cult City hadn't experienced war for more than 100 years. When Lord Airy Savoy heard that the Blackstone Fortress had fallen, he almost thought that he had misheard. After confirming the accuracy of the news, Marquis Airy immediately issued a war mobilization order. Fortunately, the nobles living in the northern region hadn't completely forgotten the bravery of their ancestors. They were much stronger than the nobles of the southern provinces. Fortunately, Cult City's defenses were well constructed. After continuous efforts, Cult City was finally ready for war before the orc army arrived. The alarms in the fortress rang, and a large group of armed soldiers began to climb up the walls. Wayne and Gavin also led the remaining soldiers up the walls. The two of them didn't run away. They were responsible for the fall of the Blackstone Fortress. If they ran away now, the lightest punishment they would receive after the war was over would be a demotion in rank. It wasn't impossible for them to be executed. So, in order to reduce their punishment, they had to contribute. During this time, Gavin gathered more than 2,000 soldiers. These soldiers were all experienced veterans. As long as they were reorganized, they would be able to fight again. Wayne also gathered a large number of soldiers. He also had a knight order under his command. Since the orcs' invasion, the war had lasted for more than half a month. In this half a month, both the humans and the orcs had suffered great losses. Of course, the humans had lost more. The orcs had captured more than 20,000 captives and slaves. They didn't intend to kill these humans. Instead, they wanted to enslave them. After all the soldiers were gathered, Gavin and Wayne immediately led them to the city walls. Along the way, soldiers were in a hurry. The constant ringing of the alarm made many people aware of the severity of the situation. When they arrived at the top of the city walls, they saw countless orcs. The entire land was covered in greenery. The war hadn't started yet, but many people were already sweating. Below the city, an orc army of tens of thousands had finished gathering. The orcs had completely surrounded Cult City. The orcs had slaughtered their way into the human kingdom's hinterland in order to uproot Cult City. As long as they could take down the city, the orcs would be able to stabilize their territory. The orcs would never be willing to let go of the fat meat that was already in their mouths. Even if this land wasn't fertile, it was still much better than the northern wastelands where the orcs originally lived. For the Kingdom of Florence, the loss of Blackstone Fortress was like a bolt from the blue. If Cult City was taken over by the orcs, it wouldn't be easy for the human kingdom to reclaim it. A low horn sounded, and the orc army began to move forward slowly. After moving into the range of the archers, the orcs began to charge forward with messy footsteps. All the siege weapons were brought out, including siege towers, siege chariots, ladders, and simple catapults in the style of the orcs. Although these catapults looked crudely made, there was no problem with their function. After being covered in a layer of kerosene, the catapults were thrown out and smashed into the city walls. Most of the rocks from the catapults weighed 2 to 3 kilograms. Some of the heavy catapults could even throw rocks that weighed a few dozen kilograms. The heavy rocks smashed into the city walls, shattering the places they hit. The burning rocks caused chaos on the city walls. The humans didn't show any signs of weakness. They also began to bombard the orcs with their catapults. Due to the limited space on the city walls, the number of catapults was much fewer than the number of orcs. However, the humans' catapults were more accurate. Plus, they had a higher vantage point, so their attack range was wider. Rocks flew out one after another. The rocks plowed a bloody path through the orc army. However, the orcs weren't afraid at all. Chapter 256. The orcs and humans unleashed their long-range weapons at each other. The orc army had also entered the range of the human archers. The human archers quickly raised their bows and shot at the sky. A dense rain of arrows rained down from the sky. The orcs raised their crude shields and braved the rain of arrows as they continued to advance. Only a few unlucky ones were hit by the arrows, but to the beast men, the damage of arrows was not high. Ordinary arrows had limited damage unless they hit a vital point. Some of the orcs who were shot pulled out the arrowheads. They didn't care about the wounds at all. After a roar, they charged even faster. The orcs braved the rain of arrows and rushed to the bottom of the city wall. They then set up ladders and began to attack the city. Rolling logs and stones were constantly thrown down from the city wall. The weight of the rocks could easily break bones. Even the orcs couldn't withstand it. Although there were many casualties, the orcs didn't back down at all. They roared and charged up the ladders. The battle became very intense from the very beginning. The orcs and humans had a fierce battle on the city wall. An orc had just killed a human soldier when he was stabbed in the heart by another human. Tens of thousands of soldiers were just numbers on the battlefield. They were expendable goods. The commanders of both sides looked at the battlefield with expressionless faces. Some shamans began to cast spells. The wizards on the city wall did the same. Apart from the wizards, there were also some temple priests in priest robes. Spells and divine spells were cast one after another. Elements surged on the battlefield. Lightning, ice, fire, and other elements were constantly exploding. Overall, the human spellcasters had the upper hand. The Battle of Kalent City was in full swing. Sulen finally made his move. More than 5,000 soldiers from Northtown City and the Harpies began to approach the Blackstone Fort. What did you say? There are no orc troops stationed in the Blackstone Fort? Sulen was surprised to hear the scout's words. Yes, sir. There are no orc troops stationed in the Blackstone Fort. There are only a small number of orcs. What are the orcs doing? Are they abandoning their escape route? Are they not planning to go back to the north? Sulen mumbled to himself. Whatever. It's none of my business whether the orcs go back or not. Boulder, take your men and attack the Blackstone Fort. Don't let any of those beast men escape. Yes, boss. Boulder rubbed his smooth head and grinned, leaving with the group of barbarians. There weren't many orcs left in the Blackstone Fort, only about 100 of them. Facing the barbarian surprise attack, these orcs couldn't fight back at all. The only orc warrior was chopped in half by Boulder's axe as soon as the battle started. Sulen easily took over the Blackstone Fort. No wonder the orcs could easily attack from the back of the Blackstone Fortress. They were basically undefended. Sulen looked at the city wall in front of him, which was only 3 to 4 meters high. There were no watchtowers, arrow towers, or arrow stacks. With the orc strength, they could climb over the wall without any tools. It was a completely different concept compared to the 20-meter-tall walls of the Blackstone stronghold. The people who built the Blackstone stronghold didn't even think about the defenses behind the stronghold. After all, the back of the Blackstone stronghold was the territory of the humans. In the end, the orcs took advantage of this weakness and easily took over the Blackstone stronghold. If the enemy attacks from the south, we won't be able to defend this stronghold at all. Sulen shook his head and gave up on the idea of taking over the stronghold. Indeed, if he took over the stronghold, the orc army's escape route would be cut off. However, if that happened, the northern battlefront city would have to face tens of thousands of orcs head-on. There would be no benefits if he won, but if he lost, everything he had accumulated over the past year would go down the drain. Aten, have you found the place where the orcs kept the human slaves? Sulen asked. That's right. His current goal was to find the human slaves that the orcs had captured. The northern provinces had been invaded by the orcs, and even a few cities had been conquered. A large number of humans who didn't manage to escape were captured and enslaved. The orcs captured the human slaves so that they could farm. There were at least tens of thousands of human slaves in the orcs' hands. Sulen was very envious of so many human slaves. For the past year, he had spent money to buy and forced people to migrate, but the population of the northern battlefront city hadn't exceeded 30,000. If he could rescue these human slaves from the orcs, the population of the northern battlefront city would most likely exceed 100,000. As for the humans you mentioned, they were originally free people and subjects of other lords. When the time comes, those nobles will ask for them from Sulen. Sorry, these are the human slaves that I rescued from the orcs. As for your people, where did they go? The orcs took them away. Go ask the orcs for them. What does it have to do with the serfs of the northern battlefront city if you're looking for your own people? The total population of the Kingdom of Florence was about 5 million. 3 million of them were distributed in the south. The northern provinces had less than 2 million people. Even if they managed to drive the orcs out in the end, they would suffer heavy losses in this orc invasion. If the northern battlefront city had a population of 100,000, it would be enough to establish a duchy. Your Excellency, the orcs have imprisoned the human slaves in a few camps. The closest one is near Winter City. There are about 15,000 people there, and 2,000 orcs are guarding it. Aten reported the information he had gathered. We have also drawn maps of the other places. Please take a look, Your Excellency. Sulen reached out and took a sheepskin scroll. He opened it and saw a simple map. The Napier Mountains, Blackstone Fortress, and a few cities in the northern provinces. The number of orcs in each city that had been conquered was marked. The locations where the orcs had imprisoned the human slaves were also marked. Well done. Sulen closed the map and patted Aten's shoulder. As the first drow to pledge loyalty to him, Sulen valued him very much. Sulen's goal was to capture the captive orcs. After the captives were captured, they would be transported to the northern battlefront city. The Blackstone Fortress was the only way. Sulen had to leave a lot of people here to guard it. Now that the humans and orcs were fighting fiercely, neither side could spare any manpower. This was a godsend opportunity for Sulen. Ever since Winter City was conquered by the orc army, the orcs had chased all the humans out. Those who refused to leave were all beheaded. Even after a few days, the city was still filled with the smell of blood. The orcs did not station many soldiers here. It could be said that this city with a population of 20,000 was now an empty city. Outside Winter City, in a simple camp, many humans were working under the whips of the orcs. They were making weapons and armor for the orc army at the front line. After conquering Winter City, the orcs obtained a lot of resources, which they naturally had to make use of. Sulen reorganized in the Blackstone Fortress and left 500 soldiers there. Then, he waited until the sky turned dark before setting off for Winter City. The 2,000 orc army was not a pushover. Even if Northern Battlefront City could win, they would suffer a lot of casualties. Therefore, his plan was to launch a sneak attack and defeat the orcs in the shortest time possible. Then, he would steal the human slaves. His goal was not to kill the orcs, but to steal a large number of people. Under the lead of the scouts, the army of northern Battlefront City quickly advanced under the cover of the night. By 1 a.m., the army had arrived at the outskirts of the orc camp. At this time, there weren't many guards in the orc camp. After the Blackstone Fort was breached, none of the cities in the northern provinces dared to leave their cities. This made the orcs let down their guard. They did not expect someone to attack the orc camp when the orc army was advancing triumphantly. "Lord, there are no hidden sentries," Aiden said as he bent over to Sullen's side. "Then, let's begin." Sulen nodded and ordered. Then, Aiden led 20 drows into the darkness. These drows were proficient in investigation, assassination, and sneak attacks. Under the cover of the night, they easily reached the entrance of the orc camp. At this moment, the 2 orc soldiers were yawning as they stood guard. Suddenly, 2 figures appeared in the shadows behind them. Then, the figures flashed and a dagger with cold light flashed towards the orc's throat. The other hand instantly covered the orc's mouth. Fresh blood spurted out. The 2 orcs widened their eyes and struggled violently to break free. But as the blood flowed out, their windpipes were cut, and their struggles became weaker and weaker. After a few breaths, they fell into a dead silence. Sulen waited outside the camp for a while. Soon, the simple gate of the camp was opened. 2 drows held torches and circled in the air 3 times. After seeing the signal, Sulen ordered the army of northern Battlefront City to attack. The army of northern Battlefront City quickly entered the camp. Such a big movement could no longer be hidden. Enemy attack. An angry roar spread throughout the camp. A large number of orcs rushed out of their tents. Seeing the orcs appear, the soldiers of northern Battlefront City formed a battle formation and rushed forward. The archers in the back also began to shoot arrows. Because the orcs were caught off guard, they didn't have shields. A large number of orcs were hit by the arrows. Compared to the bows of humans, the arrows of the half-elves and centaurs were much more powerful. As soon as the arrows came into contact, the orcs paid a heavy price. The spearmen at the front saw the orcs suffer heavy losses, so they formed a battle formation and began to push forward. Facing the spear formation of the northern Battlefront City, the orcs roared and rushed forward, but they were blocked by shields. Then, they were pierced by a few spears. Suddenly, the sound of wings flapping came from the sky. Before the orcs could react, a large number of rocks fell from the sky. The orcs, who were already lacking in defense, were smashed to pieces. The more serious ones had their heads smashed. A beastman who looked like a commander roared loudly. He wanted to organize an army, and the surrounding beastmen all gathered around him. At this time, a washbasin-sized fireball fell from the sky and hit that beastman commander. An explosion sounded. Orange flames sputtered. The orc in the center of the explosion was blown away. You're tuning in to the UnparalleledSwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.